This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still can't shake what happened last Friday night. I've hardly slept since then. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face change and those figures standing in the snow. I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I live in Frostview, a small town in northern Michigan where everyone pretty much knows everyone. It's the kind of place where the biggest excitement is usually when someone hits a deer or when the high school football team makes it to regionals. I've lived here my whole life, and nothing truly scary has ever happened to me until now. I work late shifts at the paper mill on the edge of town. The pay is decent, and I like the solitude of the night shift. Last Friday, I finished up around 1 in the morning. It had been snowing lightly for a few hours. Nothing unusual for January around here, just enough to dust the roads and make everything quiet. I was exhausted after a 12-hour shift. My eyes were heavy, and all I could think about was getting home to my bed. The roads were completely empty, which is normal for Frostview at that hour. The streetlights cast this eerie orange glow on the fresh snow, and my truck's heater was finally starting to kick in properly after 10 minutes of driving. I stopped at the red light at the intersection of Maple and Pine, the one by the closed-down Sunoco. I remember rubbing my eyes and yawning, thinking about whether I should eat something when I got home or just crash. The light was taking forever to change, which was annoying because there wasn't another car in sight. I was actually considering just driving through it when I heard it, tap, tap, tap. The sound nearly made me jump out of my skin. Someone was knocking on my passenger window. My heart immediately started hammering in my chest because I hadn't seen anyone approach the truck. 1 second I was alone, and the next there was a face peering in at me. It was a woman, maybe around my age, mid to late 20s. She had this long dark hair partially covered by a knit beanie, and her face looked so pale in the streetlight. She was wearing a puffy blue winter coat that seemed too thin for the temperature, which was hovering around 15 degrees that night. She was gesturing for me to roll down the window. I hesitated for a second, but she looked harmless enough, just cold and distressed. So I lowered the window a few inches. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said immediately. Her voice was shaking, either from the cold or from nerves. "My car broke down about a mile back on County Road 8, and I've been walking, but it's freezing out here. I live just down Lakeview Drive, maybe a mile from here. Could you possibly give me a ride? I wouldn't ask, but there's nobody else around, and I can't feel my toes anymore." She looked genuinely desperate, and I could see she was shivering. In Frostview, people help each other out. That's just how it is. Plus, it was dangerously cold to be walking, especially on the poorly lit roads. I'd want someone to help my sister if she was stuck in a similar situation. "Yeah, of course," I said, unlocking the door. "Hop in." She practically dove into the passenger seat, bringing a burst of freezing air with her. "Thank you so much," she said, holding her hands up to the heater vent. "You're a lifesaver, literally." The light finally turned green, and I continued driving. "I'm Caleb, by the way," I said. "Emma," she replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I really appreciate this. Nobody else has been on the roads for hours." As we drove, she made small talk, asking what I did for work, commenting on how cold this winter had been. Normal stuff, but something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was because I was tired, or maybe it was the way she kept glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. "So where exactly am I taking you?" I asked after a few minutes. "Oh, just up ahead. Take a right at the next intersection onto Birch Lane." I frowned. "Birch Lane? I thought you said you lived on Lakeview Drive." "Birch connects to Lakeview," she said quickly. "It's a shortcut. Saves about 10 minutes with all this snow." I didn't remember Birch Lane connecting to Lakeview, but Frostview has a lot of winding back roads, and I don't go to that part of town often, so I took the right turn as she directed. Immediately, the street got narrower and darker. There were fewer streetlights here, and the homes were spaced farther apart. I didn't recognize this area at all. which was strange because Frostview isn't that big. "Keep going straight," she said. "Then take the left up ahead onto Pine Hollow Road." Pine Hollow? I'd never even heard of that street, but I kept driving, snow crunching under my tires. The houses we were passing now looked different from the rest of Frostview, older, more run down. Some looked like they might be trailer homes that had been there for decades. Many had no lights on, and several appeared completely abandoned. "Where exactly are we?" I asked, slowing down. The snow was getting deeper here, at least 6 inches, and completely unplowed. My truck was starting to struggle. "Almost there," she said, her voice suddenly flat. "Just a little further down. Take that right." She was pointing to what looked like a narrow path between trees rather than an actual road. There were no houses visible down that way, just darkness and dense woods. My stomach knotted up. Something was very wrong. I stopped the truck. "I don't think I can make it down there," I said firmly. "The snow's too deep, and that doesn't look like a real road. I think you should tell me where we're actually going." That's when everything changed. Her face, it just transformed. The friendly, grateful expression vanished in an instant. Her eyes narrowed and her mouth set in a hard line. It was like a mask had fallen away. "Just drive down the fucking road," she hissed, all pretense gone. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter night ran through me. "No," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think you should get out here." "Drive the car." Each word was like ice. "It's just down there. You've come this far." "Get out," I repeated, reaching across her to open the passenger door. "Now." She stared at me for a long, terrifying moment. Then she smiled. Not a friendly smile, but something cold and calculating. "Your choice," she said, her voice suddenly calm again. She got out of the truck but leaned back in before closing the door. "But we really could have made this easy." She slammed the door and started walking toward the path she'd been trying to get me to drive down. I was shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I needed to turn around and get the hell out of there. I put the truck in reverse, backing up to find a spot wide enough to turn around in. That's when my headlights swept across the tree line down the road. There were people standing there, at least 5 or 6 figures, just standing motionless in the snow among the trees. In the dim glow of my headlights, I could see they were all bundled up in dark clothes. They weren't doing anything, just waiting, and the woman, Emma, was walking straight toward them. My blood turned to ice. I realized with absolute clarity what had almost happened. She hadn't needed a ride home. She'd been trying to lure me down that unplowed road where my truck would have gotten stuck in the deep snow. And once I was stuck, I didn't wait to see more. I found a spot to turn around, tires spinning in the snow, as I executed a frantic 3-point turn. As I straightened out to drive away, I looked in my rearview mirror. The woman had stopped walking and turned around. She was just standing there in the middle of the road, watching me leave. Even from a distance, I could feel her stare boring into me. I drove like hell, not even sure which way I was going, just wanting to get back to main roads and civilization. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. Every shadow made me jump, and I kept checking my mirrors, terrified I was being followed. It took me nearly 20 minutes of panicked driving to find my way back to a street I recognized. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I locked myself in the house and checked every room, closet, and window before I could even begin to calm down. I called the police the next morning. They took my statement but didn't seem overly concerned. They said they'd look into it, but hinted that maybe I had misunderstood the situation, or that the woman might have been confused about where she lived. They asked if I'd been drinking. I hadn't. The thing that keeps me up at night isn't just what might have happened to me. It's wondering how many other people she's approached at that same intersection. How many tired, kind-hearted people might have driven all the way down that path, thinking they were helping someone in need. I don't know what they wanted. Robbery, carjacking, something worse. But I know what I saw. I know what almost happened to me. I haven't driven home that way since then. I take the long route now, even though it adds 15 minutes to my commute. And I don't stop for anyone, no matter how harmless they might look. I've lived in Frostview my whole life, and I've never heard of anything like this happening here before. But I can't stop thinking about those figures standing in the snow, waiting for her to bring me to them. Story 2. I can't believe it's been 2 years since that night, and yet I still sleep with my blinds shut tight and triple check all my locks before bed. What happened that evening changed me forever. I don't think I'll ever feel completely safe in my own home again. I was 16 at the time, just a regular high school kid in Riverside. My parents had gone to visit my aunt in San Diego for the weekend, leaving me home alone. I'd begged them to let me stay behind. I had a history test to study for, and, if I'm being honest, I was looking forward to having the house to myself for once. They finally agreed after I promised I wouldn't have friends over or do anything stupid. That Friday night started out perfect. I ordered a pizza, sprawled out on the couch with my PS4 controller, and settled in for an epic gaming session without my dad telling me to turn it down or my mom asking when I was going to start studying. Our house was in a decent neighborhood, not fancy or anything, but safe. We had this open-concept living room with a sliding glass door that led to a wooden deck overlooking the backyard. During the day, it was nice having all that natural light, but at night, it basically turned into a giant black mirror reflecting the living room back at me. I must have been playing for about 3 hours straight. It was around 10:30 when I paused to grab another soda from the kitchen. On my way back, I glanced toward that glass door and my heart nearly stopped. There was a man sitting on one of our deck chairs, just staring at the house. At first I thought I was seeing things. You know how your eyes can play tricks on you when you've been staring at a screen for hours. I blinked hard, thinking maybe it was just a shadow or my reflection. But when I looked again, he was still there. A man, probably in his 30s, with short dark hair and a hoodie, just sitting there, looking at our house, at me. The worst part wasn't that he was there, it was his face. Even through the glass, even in the dim light from our porch lamp, I could see he was smiling, not a normal smile. This was stretched too wide, showing too many teeth, like someone had told him how to smile, but he'd never actually done it before. It didn't reach his eyes, which were fixed on the house with this intense focus that made my skin crawl. I froze completely. My soda can slipped from my hand and hit the carpet with a soft thud. The man didn't move, didn't react to the noise or my obvious fear. He just kept staring with that horrible grin. Then his shoulders started to shake. He was laughing, but completely silently. There was something so wrong about watching someone laugh without hearing a sound, like he was mocking me, sharing some private joke at my expense. I suddenly remembered I was alone in the house. My phone was charging in my bedroom. The sliding door, was it locked? I couldn't remember if I'd locked it after taking the trash out earlier. My legs felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds each as I backed away from the window, trying not to make any sudden movements. Once I was out of his line of sight, I ran through the house, locking every door and window I could find. Front door, locked and chain on. Back door in the kitchen, locked. All the windows, locked. I grabbed my phone from my room and held it like a lifeline, finger hovering over the emergency call button. But I needed to check that sliding door. The thought of going back to the living room made me want to throw up, but I had to know if I was safe. I crept back toward the living room, staying close to the wall. When I peeked around the corner, my blood turned to ice. The man wasn't sitting in the chair anymore. He was standing right at the glass door. His face was inches from the glass. That same terrible smile stretched across his pale, sickly face. Up close, I could see dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days. His skin was waxy and almost yellowish in the porch light. He had both hands pressed against the glass, and his breath was fogging it up in small patches. I was about to run back to my room when I saw his hand move to the door handle. He was trying to get in. I don't know where I found the courage, but I lunged forward toward the door. His hand was already turning the handle when I reached it, slapping the lock into place just as he pulled from the other side. For a second, One horrible, eternal second, we were face to face through the glass, separated by nothing but a thin pane. His eyes locked with mine, and I swear I saw pleasure there, like this was all a game to him. He held the handle for a moment longer, giving it one more firm tug, then slowly released it. He didn't back away though. Instead, he tapped on the glass with one finger, tap, 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 like he was politely knocking to be let in. Then that silent laugh again, shoulders shaking, mouth stretched wide, no sound at all. I ran back to my room, slammed the door, locked it, and called 911 with shaking hands. The operator kept asking me questions, but I could barely speak. Was he armed? I didn't know. Did I know him? No. Was he still there? I couldn't see from my bedroom. The police said they'd be there in 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. I sat on the floor between my bed and the wall, clutching my baseball bat, jumping at every tiny sound from outside my room. What if the sliding door wasn't the only way he could get in? What if there was a window I'd forgotten to check? When the police finally arrived, I heard their cars pull up, saw the flashing lights through my window. I only unlocked my bedroom door after I heard them knocking and calling out, identifying themselves. 2 officers searched the entire house, while a third stayed with me. They found nothing, no sign of forced entry, no fingerprints on the glass door except mine, no footprints on the deck even though it had rained earlier that day and the wood was still damp. The officer taking my statement looked skeptical, asking if I might have fallen asleep playing video games and had a nightmare. But I knew what I saw, that face, that smile. You don't imagine something like that. My parents came home early the next day after I called them in tears. They were supportive, but I could tell they thought the same thing as the police, that I'd scared myself watching something creepy or playing a horror game. My dad installed extra locks on all the doors and motion sensor lights around the deck, but it didn't help much. How can you feel safe when the police tell you there was never anyone there in the first place? For weeks afterward, I couldn't be alone in the house. I'd walk through rooms, scanning every corner, checking behind furniture, looking for shapes that didn't belong. I became obsessed with the locks, checking them 3, 4, 5 times before I could even try to sleep. Passing by the living room, my eyes would automatically go to the deck, expecting to see him sitting there again with that smile. My parents eventually convinced me to see a therapist. She suggested I might have experienced a stress hallucination from studying too hard or playing video games too long. I went along with it because I wanted to believe her. I wanted there to be a rational explanation that didn't involve some stranger stalking our house with that horrible smile. I'm 18 now, moved out to my own apartment in Brookfield for college. You'd think being on the 3rd floor would make me feel safer, but it doesn't. Sometimes when I'm up late studying, I'll get this feeling, this absolute certainty that if I look at my window, he'll be there, pressed against the glass, silent laughter shaking his shoulders. The worst part is not knowing why. Why our house? Why me? Was he just a random creep looking for an easy target, or was there something specific that drew him to our home that night? The not knowing haunts me almost as much as his face does. Last week I woke up at 3 in the morning for no reason. My apartment was completely silent except for the hum of my refrigerator, but something had jolted me awake. As I lay there in the dark, I heard it, a soft tap 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 against my bedroom window. Probably just a tree branch, right? Except I don't have trees near my 3rd floor window. I didn't look. I couldn't. I pulled my blanket over my head like a little kid and lay there until morning, listening to that gentle tapping that stopped just before dawn. The police never found him. They probably weren't even looking after. They decided I'd imagined the whole thing. But I know what I saw. And sometimes when I catch a glimpse of my reflection in a darkened window, I have this irrational fear that it's not going to be my face looking back at me, but his, with that wide, silent smile that still haunts my nightmares. Story 3. I still feel my stomach tighten when I think about that autumn day in 1987. I was 12 then, living in the outskirts of Moscow with my parents and younger brother Victor in one of those depressing concrete apartment blocks. Our neighborhood wasn't much, just identical gray buildings, muddy playgrounds with rusted equipment, and lots of half-finished construction sites abandoned when funding ran out. Those were strange times in Russia. Everything was changing. The stores were empty, people stood in lines for bread, and my parents would whisper at night about Gorbachev and perestroika. But for us kids, it was just life. We didn't know any different. There were 5 of us who hung out together. Me, Mikhail, Sergei, Dmitry, Anton, and Yuri. We spent most days after school roaming around, finding ways to entertain ourselves. The abandoned buildings were our favorite spots. They were everywhere back then. Half-constructed apartment complexes, old factories, storage facilities, all just left to rot when the money disappeared. About 2 kilometers from our apartment was this massive, unfinished building. It was supposed to be some kind of community center, or maybe offices. Nobody really knew. Construction had stopped maybe 3 or 4 years earlier. The place was just a concrete skeleton. No windows, no doors, just floors and pillars and walls with exposed rebar sticking out. The fence around it had long since been torn down for scrap metal. We called it the castle because it was bigger than the other abandoned sites. 5 stories of concrete with piles of bricks, metal pipes, and construction debris scattered everywhere, perfect for 12-year-old boys looking for adventure. That day started like any other. School had let out early because our math teacher was sick, so we decided to go to the castle. It was late October, cold but not freezing yet. I remember wearing this faded blue jacket my cousin had outgrown. My mother had sewn patches on the elbows where it was worn through. We brought our usual toys, some matches, a few firecrackers Sergei had gotten from his older brother, and we collected rocks along the way to throw at bottles. Nothing unusual for us. The castle was empty as always. We climbed to the 3rd floor, our favorite spot because it had this big open area where the wind didn't hit as hard. There were empty cement bags, some wooden pallets, and a few vodka bottles left by the homeless people who sometimes slept there. We spent about an hour doing what boys do, throwing rocks at targets we'd drawn on the walls, lighting small fires with scraps of paper and watching them burn out, and setting off the firecrackers in empty bottles to hear the echo through the building. Normal stuff, nothing malicious. We weren't trying to damage anything. There wasn't much left to damage anyway. I remember Dmitry had just lit a small fire using some newspaper and cardboard when we heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps coming up the concrete stairs. We weren't alarmed at first. Sometimes other kids or homeless people came here. But something about these footsteps was different, too measured, too purposeful. Then he appeared at the top of the stairs. Even now, 35 years later, I can see him perfectly. Tall, much taller than any adult I knew, maybe 190 centimeters, completely bald, not just shaved, but like he'd never had hair. His face was pale and oddly smooth, like a department store mannequin. No eyebrows. That's what struck me first. No eyebrows at all. He wore a black coat that went down to his knees. Not the shabby kind everyone had. This was different. Shiny, expensive looking, like something from a foreign magazine, and most notably, bright white sneakers. American sneakers. I knew they were American because Sergei's father had described them once. He'd seen them in a Western catalog someone had smuggled in. In 1987 Moscow, those sneakers were as out of place as a spaceship. Nobody had things like that. Nobody. The man just stood there watching us with this expression I still can't describe properly. Not angry, not friendly, just observing, like we were insects under glass. His eyes were light-colored, blue or gray, I couldn't tell in the dim light. We all froze. The only sound was the small fire crackling on the concrete floor. For maybe 15 seconds, nobody moved or spoke. Then the man smiled. It wasn't a real smile. His lips moved, but nothing else on his face changed. Those pale eyes stayed cold. "Hello, boys," he said in perfect Russian, but with something off about his accent. Not foreign exactly, just wrong, like someone who learned Russian from a book rather than from speaking it. None of us answered. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. He took a single step forward, and we all instinctively took a step back. "Do you like my shoes?" he asked, looking down at his white sneakers. They were impossibly clean despite the dirty floors. American, very comfortable. I remember thinking how bizarre this question was. Here was this strange man in an abandoned building asking children about his shoes. I have more, many more. Would you like to see them? When he looked up again, his eyes locked with mine, and I felt something I'd never felt before. Pure animal fear, the kind that freezes your blood. This wasn't like being scared of a teacher or worried about getting in trouble with my parents. This was primal, every cell in my body screaming danger. I keep them nearby, special shoes for special boys. Come, I'll show you. He took another step forward, and his coat shifted. That's when I saw it. The handle of a gun tucked into his waistband, black and metallic, partially hidden, but unmistakable. I'd never seen a real gun before, only in movies. The sight of it broke the spell of fear that had paralyzed me. Run, I whispered to my friends. For a split second, no one moved. Then Yuri bolted for the stairs on the opposite side of the floor, not the ones the man had come up. The rest of us followed instantly, our survival instincts kicking in. I expected to hear footsteps behind us, the man chasing us. But there was nothing. As I reached the stairs, I glanced back. He was still standing in the same spot, watching us flee with that same empty expression. He didn't look angry or disappointed. He just observed. We ran down those stairs so fast I'm amazed none of us broke our necks. Out of the building, across the muddy lot, and all the way to the main road without stopping once. We didn't speak until we were at least 500 meters away, and even then, it was just gasping questions. Did you see that? What the fuck was that? Did you see the gun? We made a pact not to tell our parents. They would just forbid us from going out, and we didn't want that. But we also swore never to go back to the castle, and we didn't. Not together anyway. 2 weeks later, I was walking home from school when I noticed police cars near the castle. Not just regular militia, but black cars too, the kind that meant serious business. The entire area was cordoned off with tape, and men in uniforms were going in and out of the building. My stomach dropped. I knew, somehow I just knew, it had something to do with the man in the white sneakers. That evening, our apartment block was buzzing with rumors. A body had been found in the castle, a child, beaten to death. The adults tried to keep it from us kids, but in a place like ours, word spread quickly. Some said it was a boy from another neighborhood. Others said it was a girl. No one seemed to know for sure. I wanted desperately to tell someone about the man we'd seen, but fear kept me silent. Fear of getting in trouble for being in the abandoned building. Fear of what my friends would say if I broke our pact, and most of all, fear that somehow the man would find out I had talked about him. So I said nothing, and neither did my friends. We stopped going to abandoned buildings altogether. We stayed closer to home, played in the courtyard where adults could see us. We never discussed what happened, but the castle and the man with the white sneakers hung between us like a shadow. Years passed. I grew up. The Soviet Union collapsed completely. Life changed dramatically. I lost touch with most of those childhood friends as our families moved to different areas seeking work in the new Russia. When I was 19 in 1994, I was reading a newspaper and came across an article about cold cases being reviewed. Among them was the murder of an 8-year-old boy found in an abandoned construction site in our old neighborhood in 1987. The article said the child had been lured away from a nearby playground, beaten and killed, his body hidden for days before being discovered. No suspect was ever caught. I felt sick reading it. All those years I'd tried to convince myself that maybe the man hadn't been what I thought, that maybe the body found wasn't connected to him. But deep down, I always knew. The article mentioned one detail the police had withheld from the public. The child's shoes had been removed and taken by the killer. I never told anyone about this until now. Not my parents, not my wife, not even Victor. What would be the point? The man was never caught, as far as I know. The case is probably gathering dust in some archive, but I think about those 15 seconds often. when we stood facing that man with his cold eyes and white sneakers. I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't run, if we'd been just a little less afraid, a little more curious about his offer to show us more shoes. I don't believe in God, but something saved us that day. Not courage, we weren't brave, just the opposite. It was pure fear that made us run, the instinct to flee from a predator, and that instinct was right. Sometimes when I see a bald man or a pair of white sneakers, my heart still races. I still check the locks twice before bed, and I've made sure my own children know never to talk to strangers, especially ones offering to show them things. Because I know what's out there. I've seen it with my own eyes, and sometimes, in my nightmares, I don't run. None of us do. We follow him down the stairs to see his collection of shoes, and I wake up just as he closes the door behind us. Story 4. I've always been the type who needs to disconnect. Working in IT means I'm constantly bombarded with notifications, emails, and the endless hum of server rooms. My co-worker Mike mentioned this spot he'd found a couple years back. No cell service, no people, just a flat stretch of land by a river where you could actually hear yourself think. Said it was about 2 hours from the highway, then a decent hike in. No official campsite, no facilities, nothing. Sounded perfect to me. I spent weeks planning for this solo trip. I'm not usually the adventurous type, but something about getting away from everything just felt necessary. By Friday morning, I had everything packed. My 2-person tent gives me extra room, sleeping bag rated for low temps, a small cooler with sandwiches and beer, water purifier, and basic survival gear. Nothing fancy, just the essentials. Mike had drawn me this crude map on printer paper. Looking back, I should have questioned why he didn't just send me coordinates. But at the time it seemed charming, like some treasure map from when we were kids. The directions were straightforward enough. Park at this unmarked dirt turnout, follow the game trail northeast until it forks, take the right path until you hit the river, then walk upstream about half a mile. The drive out was uneventful. I remember feeling this weight lifting as the buildings thinned out and the roads narrowed. I found the turnout easily enough, though it looked more overgrown than I expected. I locked the car, shouldered my pack, and headed into the woods around 10 in the morning. The hike in was tougher than anticipated. The game trail was barely visible in some spots, completely overgrown in others. I had to check Mike's map constantly, trying to match landmarks with his chicken scratch drawings. The forest was dense, old pines mostly, their branches creating this cathedral ceiling effect that made everything eerily quiet. No bird song, which I thought was weird, but figured it was just the time of day. After about an hour and a half of pushing through undergrowth and second-guessing my route, I finally heard the sound of running water. Following it, I broke through a line of trees, and there it was, a wide, flat area covered in dry pine needles and moss patches, with the river flowing steadily nearby. Someone had even built a fire pit using river rocks. Perfect. I spent the afternoon setting up camp, gathering firewood, and just soaking in the silence. The spot was everything Mike had promised, untouched and peaceful. I explored a bit up and down the riverbank, took some photos of interesting rock formations, even tried my hand at skipping stones like when I was a kid. The water was crystal clear but moving too fast for swimming. As the sun started to set, I built a small fire and heated up some canned stew I'd brought. That's when I first noticed something felt off. Nothing I could put my finger on, just this sense that the place wasn't as welcoming as it had seemed in the daylight. The shadows from the trees stretched longer than they should have, and the forest went dead silent. Not even insect noise, but I've been camping enough to know that forests get quiet sometimes. I dismissed it and focused on enjoying my meal. By the time full darkness hit, I was exhausted from the hike. I extinguished my fire properly around 10 and crawled into my tent with my headlamp and a paperback. I must have dozed off reading because I woke up suddenly to the sound of branches snapping nearby. My watch said it was just after midnight. I listened, holding my breath, as the cracking sounds continued, moving parallel to the river, maybe 30 yards from my tent. Just deer, I told myself, or maybe raccoons. The woods are full of animals that come out at night. I zipped up my sleeping bag tighter and eventually fell back asleep. I woke again sometime in the darkest part of night. No sound had woken me, at least none that I was conscious of, but I was suddenly completely alert. You know that feeling when your body just knows something isn't right, like some primitive part of your brain is screaming at you to pay attention. That's what it felt like. I lay perfectly still, straining to hear anything over the sound of the river and my own heartbeat. Nothing, just the water and the occasional rustle of wind through the pines. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to be alert. I stayed awake until I saw daylight filtering through the tent fabric, only dozing off when birds finally started chirping again. The morning seemed normal enough. I made coffee on my portable stove, ate a protein bar, and checked around my campsite. Nothing seemed disturbed. No tracks, no missing food, nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid, too many horror movies or something. But that feeling of being watched persisted. Like an itch between my shoulder blades I couldn't scratch. I decided to explore further upriver, thinking a hike might clear my head. About half a mile upstream, the river bent sharply, and hidden behind that bend was another campsite, or what was left of one. A collapsed tent, faded to gray and partially buried under pine needles, rusted food cans, a fire ring with ashes so old they'd merged with the soil, and beside it, something that made my skin crawl, a perfect tower of stacked rocks, balanced impossibly on each other, the kind of thing that doesn't happen naturally. I took a photo of it with my phone, not really knowing why. The place gave me this overwhelming sense of trespassing, like I'd walked into someone's home uninvited. I hurried back to my own camp, constantly glancing over my shoulder. When I got back, I immediately sensed something was different. Nothing obvious. My tent was still standing, my cooler untouched, but something felt disturbed. I checked my backpack, and that's when I realized my hunting knife was missing. Not a particularly expensive one, just a basic fixed blade I always bring camping. I emptied my entire pack, thinking maybe it had shifted to the bottom, but it was definitely gone. I spent the rest of the day on edge, constantly scanning the tree line. I considered packing up and leaving, but it was already mid-afternoon. The hike out would take at least as long as the hike in, and I didn't want to risk getting lost in those woods after dark. So I stayed, building my fire earlier than necessary, just to have light and warmth. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat in my tent with my flashlight off, but within reach, listening to every sound. Around 2 a.m, I heard it. Footsteps. Not the random pattern of an animal moving through underbrush, but slow, careful, deliberate steps, someone trying not to make noise. They were circling my tent. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The footsteps completed one circle, then started another. Whoever it was, they were taking their time, moving with a precision that terrified me more than if they'd just rushed in. After the second circle, the footsteps stopped directly behind where I was sitting in the tent. Just stopped. I could feel them standing there, less than 3 feet away, separated only by the thin fabric of my tent. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Me inside, frozen in terror. Them outside, motionless and silent. It felt like hours, my muscles cramped from staying still so long, but I didn't dare move. Eventually, the footsteps retreated, moving away from my tent and into the woods. The sound faded until all I could hear was the river again. I didn't wait for sunrise. The moment I thought it was safe, I packed everything as quickly and quietly as possible. I left the campsite as clean as I found it. Somehow that felt important, and started hiking out by the light of my headlamp. I got lost twice in the pre-dawn darkness, but eventually found the trail back to my car. The drive home was a blur. I kept checking my rearview mirror, convinced I was being followed. When I finally got cell service again, I called Mike, but it went straight to voicemail. Left him a message asking about the place, trying to sound casual but probably failing. He called back that evening, confused, said he'd never been to any unofficial campsite by a river, never drawn me a map, Had no idea what I was talking about. We've worked together for 3 years. This wasn't some prank he'd forget about. Later, looking through the photos from my trip, I realized the picture I'd taken of the abandoned campsite with the stacked rocks was gone, not deleted. There was no gap in my photo timeline. It was as if I'd never taken it at all. I've gone camping since then, but never alone. I always make sure someone knows exactly where I'm going, and I carry a satellite phone and a personal locator beacon. Some people think I'm paranoid now, but they didn't feel what I felt. What bothers me most isn't the possibility of something supernatural. It's knowing that someone was there, watching me, following me, maybe even entering my camp while I slept. Someone who knew I'd be there, alone and vulnerable. Someone who might have taken my knife, not because they needed it, but to let me know they could. I still don't know who it was or what they wanted, maybe just to scare me. If so, it worked, because the thought that keeps me up at night isn't about ghosts or monsters. It's that a very real person was standing right behind me in those woods, close enough to touch me, and I never saw their face. Story 5. I've been a home CNA for about 4 years now, and I've worked with all kinds of patients in all kinds of homes. Some sad, some happy, some messy, some immaculate. But I've never experienced anything like what's been happening at Kat's house. Kat is 78 and has mid-stage dementia. I've been caring for her for almost 8 months now. She lives alone in this old 2-story house that probably dates back to the 1930s or 40s. It's got all the character you'd expect. Wooden floors that creak with every step, walls that settle and make noises at random times, and that distinct smell that old houses have no matter how clean they are. I'm there 3 days a week, 8 hours each day, to help with meals, medication, bathing, and general companionship. The first couple of months were totally normal. Kat has her good days and bad days, like any dementia patient. Sometimes she knows exactly who I am, and other times she thinks I'm her daughter or a neighbor. It's all part of the job, and I'm used to it. But then weird stuff started happening. It began in the basement. Kat's washer and dryer are down there, and part of my job is doing her laundry. The basement is exactly what you'd expect. Concrete floor, exposed beams on the ceiling, a small bathroom tucked in the corner, and various boxes and old furniture pushed against the walls. The stairs leading down are wooden and incredibly loud. They creak so badly you can hear someone coming from anywhere in the house. About 2 months ago, I was down there sorting laundry when I felt this presence behind me. You know that feeling when someone's watching you? It was like that, but stronger. The air felt different, heavier somehow. When I turned around, Kat was standing at the bottom of the stairs, just staring at me with this blank expression. No smile, no recognition, nothing. "Kat, you scared me," I said, trying to laugh it off. "Let's get you back upstairs, okay?" She didn't respond, just kept staring. I gently took her arm and guided her back up to her chair in the living room. She went without resistance, which was a relief because sometimes she can get agitated when redirected. It wasn't until I was halfway back down to the basement that I realized something. I never heard her come down those stairs, not a single creak. And Kat isn't exactly light on her feet these days. She shuffles when she walks and needs support most of the time. There's no way she could have come down those stairs without me hearing. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was just focused on the laundry and didn't notice, but deep down, I knew that wasn't possible. A week later, I was back in the basement switching loads of laundry. The washer had just finished its cycle, and I was transferring wet clothes to the dryer. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of the basement stairs creaking. Creak, 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 slow and deliberate. My heart started racing. "Kat," I called out. "Is that you? You shouldn't be on the stairs by yourself." No answer, just more creaking. I rushed to the bottom of the stairs, expecting to see Kat making her way down, but there was no one there. The creaking stopped as soon as I looked. I ran up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, and found Kat sitting exactly where I'd left her, in her armchair by the window, watching birds at the feeder. She looked peaceful, like she hadn't moved an inch. "Did you just try to come downstairs?" I asked her. She looked at me with confusion. "No, dear. I've been watching my little friends." She pointed to the birds outside. I checked the rest of the house, thinking maybe someone had come in. The doors were locked, windows shut. We were alone. That was the beginning. Since then, things have escalated. Last week, I needed to use the bathroom while doing laundry, so I used the small one in the basement. It's tiny, just a toilet and a sink, no shower. I was washing my hands when the bathroom light flickered. Once, twice, then went out completely. The basement has no windows, so it was pitch black. I felt my way to the door, pushed it open, and stepped out into the main basement area. The main lights were off too, which made no sense because I'd left them on. There was just a small amount of light coming from the top of the stairs where the door was slightly ajar. In that dim light, I could make out a figure standing among the hanging laundry I'd just put up. It was about Kat's height, but something about it seemed wrong. The proportions, the stillness. I fumbled for the light switch, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. When the lights came on, there was nobody there, just the laundry, swaying slightly as if someone had just walked past it. I checked on Kat immediately. She was napping in her chair, snoring softly. There's no way she could have gone down to the basement and back up in the time it took me to use the bathroom. It was physically impossible. The incidents aren't just limited to the basement either. 3 days ago, I was helping Kat in the upstairs bathroom. She was seated on the toilet, and I was standing by the sink, giving her privacy while staying close in case she needed help. I felt a cold spot pass through me, like walking through a pocket of freezing air on an otherwise warm day. Then I heard it, a deep whisper right behind my ear. "Help her." I spun around so fast I slipped on the small bathroom rug. There was no one there, of course. I fell hard, hitting my head on the edge of the bathtub. Kat didn't even notice my panic. She was focused on trying to stand up. I ended up with a small cut on my scalp and a bruise that's still tender. I told Kat and her daughter that I'd just slipped, leaving out the whisper. What was I supposed to say? That a ghost was telling me to help her. They'd think I was losing it. Then yesterday, something happened that I still can't explain. Kat has days where her dementia makes her suspicious or confused about who I am. Usually she'll tell me to leave her house thinking I'm an intruder. We're trained to handle this, redirect, reassure, never argue. But yesterday was different. I was preparing lunch in the kitchen when Kat started getting agitated in the living room. I went to check on her, and she was staring at the empty corner of the room, her face twisted with fear. "Vanessa needs to go away," she said firmly. "Who's Vanessa?" I asked, looking around. We were alone in the house. "Vanessa," Kat pointed at the empty corner. "Tell her to leave my house. She's not welcome here. I've learned to play along with delusions rather than challenge them." "I'll tell her to go," I said gently. "Don't worry." "No." Kat grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "You tell her. She won't listen to me anymore." I walked over to the empty corner. "Vanessa, you need to leave now. This is Kat's house, and she wants you to go." Kat's eyes followed something I couldn't see, moving from the corner, across the room, toward the hallway. Then she relaxed a bit. "She's angry," she whispered. "She's always angry." "Who is Vanessa?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Kat just shook her head. "She lived here before, a long time ago." Then she clutched my hand. "Don't leave me alone with her. Promise you won't leave." For the rest of my shift, Kat wouldn't let me out of her sight, not even to use the bathroom. I had to leave the door cracked so she could see I was still there. She kept looking over my shoulder, her eyes tracking something invisible, her expression alternating between fear and sadness. When I was getting ready to leave at the end of my shift, Kat became frantic. "She'll come back when you're gone," she insisted. "She always does." I tried to reassure her that her daughter would be arriving soon, which was true, but Kat just kept shaking her head. "Vanessa doesn't like it when I'm alone. That's when she comes." I ended up staying an extra 30 minutes until her daughter arrived, even though I wasn't getting paid for it. I couldn't leave her like that. I haven't told Kat's daughter about any of this. What would I say? Your mom's house is haunted? Your mom is hallucinating a woman named Vanessa? Either way, it would sound like I'm suggesting Kat's dementia is worse than we thought, and I don't actually believe that's the case. Kat's dementia symptoms have been stable. This feels like something else entirely. Look, I know how this sounds. I've gone through every rational explanation I can think of. Maybe Kat is more mobile than I realized and somehow manages to move silently despite her condition. Maybe the house settling is creating noises that sound like footsteps. Maybe the whisper was just the bathroom fan, and the figure in the basement was just laundry and shadows playing tricks on my eyes. But when I put it all together, the silent appearance in the basement, the stairs creaking with no one there, the lights going out, the whisper, Kat's fear of this Vanessa person, it forms a pattern that I can't explain away. I've got another shift at Kat's tomorrow, and I'm dreading it. I love Kat, and I want to continue caring for her, but the thought of going back into that basement makes my skin crawl. I've started doing laundry only when absolutely necessary, and I try to get it done as quickly as possible. The worst part? I'm starting to think that whatever or whoever is in that house might actually be trying to communicate something important. Why else would it whisper, "Help her"? What if Vanessa isn't just a figment of Kat's imagination, but something trying to warn us? I don't know what to do. I can't quit. Kat needs consistency in her care, and frankly, I need this job. But every time I walk into that house now, I find myself looking over my shoulder, avoiding the basement, and jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. And I keep wondering, who was Vanessa, and what does she want with Kat? Story 6. I still struggle to talk about what happened at our sorority house in Riverdale. It's been 3 years since I moved out, but the memories are still so fresh it could have been yesterday. I've only shared bits and pieces with my closest friends, but I think it's time to get the whole story off my chest. I joined Chi Omega my sophomore year of college. When I first saw the house, I was completely enchanted. It looked like something straight out of a southern dream, this massive white house with towering pillars and this gorgeous wraparound porch where we'd all sit during warm evenings. It was the kind of place you'd see in movies about college life, you know. Picture perfect. The first time I went inside during rush week, everything seemed normal. The main floor was stunning, high ceilings, wooden floors that creaked just enough to give it character, and these beautiful old fireplaces. The seniors showing us around were so proud, talking about the history and how the house had belonged to the sorority since the early 90s. Then we went upstairs. I remember the exact moment my foot hit the top step of that staircase. It was like walking through some invisible barrier. The air felt different, heavier and way colder than it should have been in September. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I got this overwhelming feeling that I wasn't welcome there. I brushed it off as nerves. I was desperate to get into this sorority, and I figured my anxiety was just getting the best of me. The upstairs hallway was long and narrow with bedrooms on either side. Everything looked normal enough, but something felt off. At the very end of the hall was this odd-shaped guest room that nobody seemed to want. When they showed it to us, one of the seniors mentioned they usually put visiting alums there. I remember thinking how weird the room was. The ceiling sloped at strange angles, and there was this door in the far wall that led to the attic. That attic door, God, I wish I'd never seen what was behind it. Fast forward a few weeks, and I got my bid. I was beyond excited to move in at the start of the next semester. My roommate Taylor was amazing, and we got a decent-sized room on the second floor, about halfway down that long hallway. The first few weeks were exactly what I'd hoped college would be. Late nights studying together, movie marathons in the common room, and getting to know my sisters. The weird stuff started small. I'd wake up feeling like someone had been watching me. Things in my room would be slightly moved, not enough to make me think someone had been going through my stuff, but just off. Like my laptop would be at a different angle on my desk, or my shoes would be arranged differently than how I'd left them. My first really scary experience happened during summer break before junior year. Most of the girls had gone home, but I was staying to work a local internship. Only me and this other sister, Jessica, were in the house that week. We'd been watching a movie downstairs when we heard this massive thud from upstairs, like something heavy had fallen. We both froze, looking at each other like, "Did you hear that too?" Then came this horrible scraping sound, like metal dragging across the floor, followed by footsteps. Not like someone walking normally, more like someone dragging their feet, slowly moving toward the top of the stairs. Jessica grabbed my arm so hard it left marks. "Is there anyone else here?" she whispered. We both knew there wasn't. I don't know where I found the courage, but I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the drawer and we went to investigate. The noise had seemed to come from the kitchen, which was weird because we'd been sitting right next to it and hadn't seen anyone go in. When we got there, 2 metal baking sheets were on the floor, at least 15 feet from the cupboard they were stored in. There was no way they could have just fallen and ended up there. They would have had to travel across the entire kitchen. We checked every room, every closet, under every bed. Nobody. We even checked outside to see if maybe someone had broken in, but all the doors and windows were locked from the inside. We ended up sleeping in the same room that night, with a chair propped under the doorknob. The next morning, Jessica packed her stuff and went to stay with her boyfriend off campus. I didn't blame her. I would have left too if I had somewhere to go. During my junior year, things escalated. We started keeping a journal of all the weird shit that happened, continuing one that had apparently been passed down since the 90s. Reading through the old entries was terrifying. Sisters from 20 years ago describing the exact same things we were experiencing. There were accounts of girls seeing a woman's reflection in the mirror in the upstairs bathroom, but when they turned around, nobody was there. Multiple entries about hearing voices, both male and female, having conversations when people were alone in the house. Objects would disappear only to reappear days later in bizarre places, like the time someone's hairbrush vanished from her room and was later found halfway up the attic stairs. Lights would turn on and off by themselves. Doors would open or close when nobody was near them. Once, 3 of us came home after classes to find all the kitchen furniture rearranged and every cabinet door standing open. But the attic was the worst. One night during a sorority sleepover, I drew the short straw and had to sleep in that weird guest room at the end of the hall. I was terrified, but didn't want to seem like a baby in front of everyone. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up feeling like someone was tugging on my blanket. I thought maybe I'd been dreaming, but then it happened again. A distinct pull that dragged the blanket down toward the foot of the bed. I was completely frozen with fear, unable to even scream. Then I heard it. Footsteps on the attic stairs behind that door. Slow, deliberate steps coming down. In the dim light from the hallway seeping under my door, I could see the attic doorknob turning back and forth. The door itself began to shake like someone was trying to force it open, but thankfully there was a chain lock on it that I'd secured before going to bed. I lay there for what felt like hours, watching that doorknob turn and the door rattle in its frame. Eventually, I must have passed out from sheer terror. At breakfast the next morning, Megan, who had been sleeping in the room across the hall, asked if I'd had any weird dreams. When I asked why, she said she'd had a nightmare about an evil man trying to convince her to come up to the attic with him. She'd never been up there and had no idea I'd experienced anything strange during the night. After that, I couldn't stand it anymore. I begged some of the other sisters to come explore the attic with me in broad daylight. 4 of us went up there together one Saturday afternoon. The moment we opened that door, the temperature dropped at least 10 degrees. The stairs were narrow and steep, with this horrible creak on every step. At the top was a small landing and another door. When we pushed it open, I felt like I was entering a completely different world. The attic stretched the length of the house with small dormer windows letting in dusty beams of light. The walls. God, the walls were the worst part. They were covered in cardboard, like someone had taken boxes, flattened them out, and nailed them to every surface. And on every piece of cardboard was writing, cramped, tiny writing that covered every inch. Some of it looked like Bible verses, but most of it was too small to read without getting close, and none of us wanted to do that. In the center of the room was a single wooden chair facing the far wall. No dust on it, like someone had been sitting there recently. We didn't stay long enough to investigate further. Something about that room felt actively malevolent, like it didn't want us there. That night, I dreamed about a man sitting in that chair, writing frantically on those cardboard walls, occasionally turning to look at me with completely black eyes. After almost 2 years of this, our chapter finally made the decision to move. 25 years in that house was enough. The Alumni Association found us a new property, and we moved out over spring break of my senior year. I've never felt such relief as I did carrying that last box out of that place. I don't know what was happening in that house. I don't know if it was haunted in the traditional sense, or if something more complex was going on. All I know is that I still have nightmares about that attic, about that chair, about the writing on the walls. Sometimes I wake up feeling like someone's pulling my blankets, and I have to turn on every light in my apartment. The strangest part? After we moved out, I went back once to grab a textbook I'd accidentally left behind. The realtor let me in, and I ran upstairs to my old room. On my way back down, I glanced toward the guest room and saw that the attic door was standing wide open. The chain lock was still in place, but somehow the door was open. I left so fast I nearly fell down the main stairs. I later heard from the realtor that they've had trouble selling the property. Apparently, prospective buyers keep backing out after the second-floor tour. One family made an offer but retracted it the next day, saying their young daughter refused to enter the house because the man in the attic didn't like them. I don't talk about it much anymore. People either think I'm making it up, or they get that look, like they feel sorry for me and my overactive imagination. But I know what I experienced. We all did. And whatever was in that house, I hope it stays there, writing on its cardboard walls and sitting in that dusty chair, far away from me and everyone I care about. Story 7. I still get chills thinking about what happened during that camping trip in Georgia last winter. Me and 2 buddies from college, Luke and Ethan, had done this route 3 times before. We're all experienced hikers. I've been doing wilderness camping since I was 14 and know my way around the Chattahoochee National Forest pretty well. We'd planned the trip months in advance, expecting typical January weather. Cold but manageable with the right gear. What we didn't expect was the sudden cold snap that hit while we were already 2 days into our 5-day trek. The temperature dropped from the high 40s to the low 20s in less than 6 hours. We considered turning back, but the nearest access point was actually further ahead than behind us, so we decided to push forward. By late afternoon, the cold was biting through our layers. My fingers were getting numb, even with gloves on. We found a decent spot to camp near a creek bend, far enough from the water to avoid midnight moisture, but close enough for convenience. The site was perfect, a small clearing surrounded by thick pines that would block some of the wind. Setting up camp was brutal in that cold. The tent stakes kept slipping from my fingers, and the ground was already starting to freeze. Every breath came out in thick clouds. Luke, always the practical one, immediately started gathering wood for the fire, while Ethan and I finished with the tents. We knew we needed a serious blaze to make it through the night. The temperature kept dropping as darkness fell. We built the fire pit with stones from near the creek, digging it deeper than usual and surrounding it with a ring of larger rocks to reflect heat. When we finally got the fire going, it was massive, probably bigger than safety guidelines would recommend, but we were more concerned about freezing than forest fires in those temperatures. We cooked a simple dinner of dehydrated stew, huddled around the flames, talking about how we'd need to reconsider our route tomorrow based on the weather. The fire felt like the only living thing for miles, this intense, comforting presence that was keeping us alive. I remember staring into it, watching the way the flames moved, feeling grateful for something so simple. We decided to sleep in shifts, keeping the fire fed throughout the night. I took first watch while Luke and Ethan tried to get some sleep. The cold was so intense that we dragged our sleeping bags as close to the fire as was safe. After about 2 hours, I woke Ethan for his shift and crawled into my sleeping bag. I don't know exactly what time it was when Luke started tapping my foot. It wasn't a panicked movement, just a gentle, persistent tap with what I later realized was a stick. I opened my eyes, immediately alert. Something in his steady, deliberate tapping told me not to make sudden movements. The fire had died down some, but was still giving off enough light to see. Luke was completely still in his sleeping bag, his eyes fixed on something across the fire pit. I followed his gaze and felt my entire body go rigid. 2 massive wild boars were standing at the edge of our campsite. Not small ones either. These were huge, at least 150 pounds each, with those curved tusks that can gut a person with one swipe. They were just watching us, their breath making clouds in the freezing air. I've encountered wild boars before while hiking. Usually they run away when they sense humans. These didn't. They stood there, unnervingly still, their eyes reflecting the firelight. My mind immediately went to our gear. The only thing remotely useful as a weapon was the small hand axe we'd used to split kindling. It was leaning against a log right next to the fire pit, maybe 10 feet away from me, but it might as well have been a mile with those boars standing there. Ethan was still asleep, completely unaware. I was terrified he'd wake up suddenly and startle them. Then they started moving. Not toward us, thank God, but toward the fire. They moved slowly, deliberately, sniffing the ground as they approached the flames. My first thought was they were looking for food scraps we might have dropped while cooking. We'd been careful to hang our food from a tree away from camp, but maybe some crumbs had fallen, but they weren't investigating for food. The first boar reached the edge of the fire pit and did something I still can't explain. It began deliberately pushing dirt into the fire with its snout and front hooves. Not randomly or accidentally, it was methodically shoveling dirt onto our flames. I glanced at Luke. His eyes were wide, reflecting the dying firelight. Neither of us dared move. The second boar joined in, circling to the other side of the fire pit. Together, they began systematically extinguishing our fire. One would push dirt while the other watched us. Then they'd switch. It was coordinated in a way that made my skin crawl. These weren't just animals acting on instinct. This felt purposeful. The temperature was well below freezing now. That fire was the only thing keeping hypothermia at bay. As the flames died down under the dirt being pushed onto them, I could feel the cold intensifying, creeping toward us like something alive. It took them maybe 15 minutes to reduce our robust fire to nothing but a few glowing embers. The clearing grew darker with each passing minute, shadows stretching across our vulnerable sleeping bags. The only sounds were the soft grunts of the boars and the occasional hiss of an ember being smothered. Once the fire was effectively out, both boars stood there for a moment, as if inspecting their work. Then, seemingly satisfied, they turned and walked back into the forest. Not running, not spooked, just calmly leaving as if their task was complete. The moment they disappeared into the darkness, Luke scrambled for the hand axe. I unzipped my sleeping bag as quietly as possible and shook Ethan awake, keeping my hand over his mouth so he wouldn't make noise. His eyes flew open in panic, but he stayed quiet as I whispered what had happened. We were too afraid to try rebuilding the fire right away. What if the boars were waiting just beyond the tree line? What if our light attracted them back? Or worse, attracted whatever they might have been working for? That thought kept circling in my head. It felt like they were clearing the way for something else. So we sat there in the freezing dark, backs pressed together for warmth, Luke clutching the axe so hard his knuckles must have been white, though I couldn't see them. Every sound from the forest made us flinch, a branch breaking in the distance, the wind rustling through pine needles. Each noise could have been the boars returning, or something worse following their path. After about an hour of nothing happening, the cold became too much to bear. We had to risk rebuilding the fire or risk hypothermia. Ethan volunteered to do it, while Luke and I kept watch with the axe. We managed to get a small fire going again, much smaller than before. Nobody slept for the rest of the night. We kept that axe between us, passing it back and forth as our hands got too cold or too stiff to hold it properly. We talked in whispers, theories growing wilder as the night wore on. Were the boars trained somehow? Were they unusually intelligent? Was this some kind of territorial behavior we'd never heard of? Nothing made sense. Dawn came slowly, that gray winter light filtering through the trees. Only when the sun was fully up did we dare to really move around the campsite. That's when we saw the tracks, boar prints everywhere, confirming we hadn't hallucinated the whole thing. But there were other prints too, ones I didn't recognize, smaller than the boars, with what looked like 5 toes. Not bear, not coyote, not any animal I'm familiar with. Those prints formed a circle around our campsite, just at the edge of the clearing, as if something had been watching us throughout the night. We packed up in record time, not even bothering with breakfast, just stuffed everything into our packs and got the hell out of there. We cut our trip short, heading straight for the nearest ranger station. We told the ranger about the boars, but not about how they put out our fire. It sounded too crazy, like we'd been hallucinating from the cold. The ranger just nodded and said wild boars can be aggressive, and we were lucky they didn't charge us. But I know what I saw. Those boars weren't just being aggressive animals, they were deliberately putting out our fire, our source of heat and safety. They understood what the fire meant and decided to eliminate it. I've been camping since I was a kid, spent countless nights in the wilderness, but after that night I've never looked at the forest the same way. When I'm out there now, I can't shake the feeling that the wilderness isn't just indifferent to our presence. Parts of it might be actively hostile. That there might be an intelligence out there we don't understand, using even the animals against us when we get too comfortable. I still go hiking, I still camp. But I always bring extra fire starters now, and I never take my eyes off the darkness beyond the flames. Story 8. I still can't believe I'm actually typing this out. My hands are shaking, and I've rewritten this intro like 5 times already. I need to tell someone what's been happening to us because I honestly don't know what to do anymore. My mom and I moved into this house in Harborview on January 1st this year. New year, new beginning, right? That's what we thought. The place seemed perfect, an old Victorian split into 2 apartments with these gorgeous bay windows overlooking the harbor. The rent was surprisingly affordable for such a nice coastal town, and we were just grateful to find something within our budget after Mom's divorce. The first month was totally normal. We unpacked, got settled, met our downstairs neighbor, a quiet older guy named Tom who mostly keeps to himself, and started to feel at home. Mom even painted the living room this soft blue color that matched the ocean view. Everything felt right. Then the knocking started. It was maybe early February when Mom first mentioned it. She was acting weird at breakfast, looking tired, and when I asked what was wrong, she just said, "Did you knock on my door last night?" I hadn't. I'd been asleep by 10. She described hearing 2 distinct knocks on her bedroom door around midnight. Just 2, knock knock, then nothing. She'd called out thinking it was me, but when nobody answered, she figured I'd changed my mind about whatever I wanted to tell her. But then it happened again an hour later. Same thing, 2 knocks, silence. By the 3rd time, around 2 in the morning, she was annoyed enough to get up and check, but there was nobody there. The hallway was empty, my door was closed, and when she peeked in, I was fast asleep. I suggested maybe it was the pipes or the house settling. It's an old building after all. She agreed that made sense, and we kind of laughed it off. Except it kept happening, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, always at night, always the same pattern. 2 knocks, then nothing. After a while, Mom stopped getting up to check. She'd just call out, "What?" And when nobody answered, she'd try to go back to sleep. We might have been able to dismiss it as just an old house being weird if that was all that happened. But it wasn't. About 3 weeks ago, I was at school and Mom was at work when my phone buzzed with a text from Tom downstairs. "Could you guys turn down your TV? It's really loud." I texted back that nobody was home, and he responded that he could definitely hear our kitchen TV blasting. I called Mom, who was in the middle of her shift at the hospital. She's a nurse, and she confirmed she'd turned everything off before leaving that morning. When we both got home that afternoon, the TV in the kitchen was on. Not just on, it was loud, tuned to some shopping channel I know we never watch. Mom and I just stood there staring at it. I still remember the exact commercial that was playing. Some lady selling these tacky crystal necklaces. The remote was right where it always is, on the counter next to the fridge. Maybe there was a power surge that turned it on, I suggested, but even as I said it, I knew that made no sense. Power surges don't turn up volume settings or change channels. Mom just unplugged the TV completely. We didn't talk about it much after that, but I noticed she started checking that all electronics were unplugged before we left the house. Things were quiet for maybe a week after that. The knocking happened a couple more times, but we'd almost gotten used to it. Then last night happened, and now I'm sitting here trying to make sense of something that defies explanation. It was around 2 in the morning. I'd gone to bed around 11 wearing my favorite oversized Nirvana t-shirt and gray sweatpants, my standard sleep outfit. I must have crashed hard because I didn't hear anything until Mom burst into my room in the early morning looking like she'd seen a ghost, which, according to her, she had, my ghost. She was trembling so badly she could barely speak. I got her to sit on my bed, and it took several minutes of me just holding her hand before she could tell me what happened. Mom said she'd woken up around 2 a.m. feeling like someone was watching her. When she opened her eyes, she saw what looked like me peeking around her doorframe. Just my head and shoulders, like I was checking if she was awake. "Eliza," she'd called out. No response. She said my figure didn't move, just kept peeking in. Getting irritated, thinking I was playing some stupid prank, she sat up and said, "You're scaring me. What do you want?" That's when it got really freaky. The figure straightened up and stepped partially into the doorway, and Mom could see it was definitely what looked like me, wearing exactly what I had on, my Nirvana shirt and gray sweats. But something was off about the way it moved, too stiff, too mechanical. She described how she felt suddenly cold, like all the warmth had been sucked out of the room. The figure just stood there, not speaking, not fully entering the room. Mom said she was about to get up when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The figure, the thing that looked like me, began to fade, not like it was walking away or moving back into the shadows. It was literally evaporating, becoming transparent right before her eyes, until there was nothing there at all. She sat frozen for what felt like forever, afraid to move, afraid to call out again. Finally, she gathered enough courage to grab her phone for light and check the hallway. Empty. That's when she rushed to my room and found me sound asleep in bed, wearing the exact same clothes the apparition had been wearing. She spent the rest of the night in my room, sitting in my desk chair, watching me sleep. When I woke up around 6, she looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. It wasn't sleep paralysis, she insisted when I suggested it. I was fully awake. I sat up. I spoke to it. We spent most of today trying to come up with rational explanations. Carbon monoxide? The detector is working fine. Someone breaking in? No signs of entry. And why would an intruder dress exactly like me and then disappear? Sleepwalking on my part. Mom swears I was in my bed the whole time. This afternoon, Mom went to the local New Age shop and bought sage and incense. She's been burning it in every room, opening windows despite the chilly March air, saying prayers I've never heard her say before. She's not even religious normally. I caught her Googling doppelgangers and spirits that mimic family members. She called in sick to work tonight, something she never does. She's currently asleep on our couch because she refuses to go back to her bedroom. The thing is, I believe her. I believe she saw something. The look in her eyes when she described it, pure terror, wasn't something you can fake. And there have been other things I haven't mentioned. Small things, objects that aren't where we left them, cold spots in rooms that shouldn't be cold. That feeling you get sometimes when you're certain someone is watching you, but you're alone in the house. I'm writing this sitting at our kitchen table. It's nearly midnight now. Mom's finally asleep on the couch after taking some Benadryl. I keep looking over my shoulder, expecting to see I don't know what. Myself, some twisted version of me peeking around the corner. What terrifies me most isn't just that there might be something supernatural in our house. It's that whatever it is, it chose to look like me. Why me? What does it want? If it can take my form, what else can it do? We've only been here 3 months, but already I'm dreading the idea of trying to fall asleep tonight. I keep wondering if Mom will wake up and see me standing over her again, or worse, if I'll wake up and see Mom standing over me, knowing it's not really her. I just heard 2 knocks on the wall behind me. Knock, knock, clear as day. There's no one there. I checked. I should wake Mom up. We should leave, go to a hotel or something. But what if it follows us? What if it's not attached to the house, but to us? The kitchen just got freezing cold. I can see my breath now, which makes no sense because it's not that cold outside, maybe 50 degrees, and our heating works fine. Something just brushed against my hair, like fingers but not quite solid. The lights are flickering. 2 more knocks, louder this time. I think I hear footsteps in the hallway, but they sound wrong somehow, like they're walking on the ceiling instead of the floor. I need to go check on Mom. I'm going to grab my phone and wait. I can see into the living room from where I'm sitting. Mom's not on the couch anymore, but I can hear her voice coming from my bedroom, calling my name. That's not possible. I just saw her on the couch seconds ago. There's someone standing in the hallway now. I can just make out a silhouette. It looks like Mom, but something's wrong with the shape. It's too tall, too thin. It's calling my name again, but the voice is all wrong now, like several voices layered on top of each other. I think it knows I can see it. It's moving toward me. Story 9. I've been a trucker for nearly 25 years now. After a while, you've seen pretty much everything the road can throw at you. Drunk drivers, crazy weather, wildlife jumping out of nowhere. But what happened to me that night in Nevada still keeps me up at night. I've never told the full story until now because honestly, who'd believe me? But I need to get this off my chest, especially after hearing about that rest stop being shut down. It was September 12th, 2018. I remember the date exactly because I'd called my daughter earlier to wish her happy birthday. I was on my regular Detroit to Sacramento route hauling auto parts, a drive I'd done maybe 100 times before. Nothing special about this run, just another week on the road. Around 2 in the morning, I hit that stretch of Highway 95 in northern Nevada, middle of nowhere, pitch black except for my headlights. My electronic log was telling me I needed to stop soon or I'd be in violation of my hours. Anyone who drives trucks knows you don't mess with those regulations unless you want hefty fines. I pulled into this rest area I'd used a few times before. Nothing fancy, just a strip of asphalt with some parking spots, a small bathroom building, and a couple picnic tables. There were maybe 4 other trucks there that night, spaced out across the lot. I backed my Kenworth into a spot near the edge, went through my usual routine of securing the cab, and climbed into my sleeper berth. I remember checking my phone before trying to sleep. It was exactly 2:17 according to my call log. I texted my wife Patricia that I'd stopped for the night, then made a quick note in this journal I'd been keeping. See, for the past month or so, I'd been experiencing some weird stuff on my drives. Nothing major at first, just my truck radio suddenly cutting out for no reason, or my headlights flickering when there was no electrical issue to be found. Then it got stranger. Twice I'd had my entire dashboard go dead for a few seconds before everything came back online. My dispatcher thought I was making excuses for late deliveries, and the mechanics couldn't find anything wrong with my rig. But the worst part was this feeling I kept getting that I was being followed. Not by another vehicle. I've dealt with road rage and tailgaters plenty of times. This was different. I'd be driving alone at night and suddenly get this overwhelming sense that something was watching me, pacing me just beyond where my lights could reach. I'd check my mirrors, roll down my window to look around, but there was never anything there, just this presence. I'd started documenting everything in a little notebook, dates, times, locations, partly to show the mechanics there was a pattern, partly to convince myself I wasn't going crazy. Patricia thought I was working too hard, not getting enough sleep. Maybe she was right. That night, I wrote down Highway 95 rest area, 2:17 a.m., slight electrical fluctuation in cab lights when pulling in. Nothing major, just a brief dimming. I put the notebook in my jacket pocket, plugged in my phone to charge, and tried to get some sleep. I don't know how long I was out, maybe 30 minutes. I woke up suddenly, completely alert, heart pounding like I'd heard a gunshot. But the night was silent, too silent actually. Usually at a rest area, there's always some noise, an idling engine, someone's refrigeration unit running, distant highway sounds. But there was nothing. I sat up in my bunk and noticed my phone was dead, despite being plugged in. The little power indicator lights on my cab's electronics were all off too. It was like someone had cut all the power. That's when I heard it. A soft scraping sound moving around the outside of my truck. Not like an animal or the wind. This was deliberate, like someone or something dragging their hand along the metal of my rig, circling around from the passenger side toward the back. I'm not a small guy and I don't scare easily, but something about that sound made the hair on my neck stand straight up. I quietly moved to the driver's seat and peered out the windows. The rest area was bathed in this weird grayish light, not moonlight. The sky was overcast. This light seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I could see the other trucks parked nearby, but they looked wrong somehow, like they were slightly blurred around the edges, and there was nobody moving around outside, no signs of life. But that scraping sound was still circling my truck. I tried starting my engine, nothing. Tried the lights, nothing. Tried my radio to call for help, nothing but static. That's when I noticed my phone had suddenly turned back on by itself. It showed 2:58 a.m. and the battery was at 100%, despite being dead minutes before. I grabbed my phone and started recording, whispering what was happening. The scraping had stopped, but now I could see something moving between the trucks. It stayed just at the edge of visibility, never quite where I could focus on it properly. Not an animal, definitely not a person either, just this shape that seemed to bend the darkness around it. Then my dog started barking like crazy from his crate. Diesel's a German Shepherd, ex-police dog, and he doesn't spook easily. But he was going absolutely ballistic, scratching at his crate, making this high-pitched whine I'd never heard from him before. I looked back out the window and froze. There was a flashlight beam moving near my passenger door. At least it looked like a flashlight at first glance, but the light was all wrong. Not white or yellow, but this pale bluish color that didn't illuminate much of anything. Then came this sound. God, I still hear it in my nightmares. Like metal grinding against metal, but with this wet, organic quality to it. Like somebody dragging a rake across a chalkboard while chewing with their mouth open. It was coming from right outside my door. I reached for the baseball bat I keep under my seat. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip it. Through the window, I could see something pressing against the passenger door. Not a hand, but something that left a smear of thick, oily liquid on the glass. The liquid seemed to move on its own, forming shapes that made my eyes hurt to look at. The grinding noise got louder, and I realized with horror that something was trying to get into my truck. I heard clicks from the door locks, even though they were secured from the inside. I lunged across the cab and held the passenger door handle tight, feeling it trying to move under my grip. That's when everything electronic in my truck suddenly came back to life all at once. Lights, engine, radio, everything. The radio was blasting static at full volume, and through the static I swear I could hear voices speaking words that weren't in any language I've ever heard. I looked down at my phone and saw the recording had stopped. When I tried to play it back, there was just my voice for a few seconds, then this horrible distortion that made my ears ring. Outside, one of the other trucks started its engine. I saw its headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating something tall standing between our vehicles. For a split second, I got a clear look at it, and my mind still can't process what I saw. It was like my brain refuses to form a complete picture. I remember segments, something that bent in ways a body shouldn't bend, surfaces that seemed both solid and liquid at the same time, and eyes. So many eyes, all wrong, all looking directly at me. I must have blacked out. The next thing I remember is someone pounding on my driver's side window. I nearly had a heart attack until I realized it was another trucker, this older Hispanic guy who looked as terrified as I felt. "We need to go now," he shouted through the glass. "Something's happening. We need to go." I didn't need to be told twice. I fired up my engine, which thankfully started right away, and followed his truck out of that rest area like the devil himself was chasing us. As we pulled out, I glanced in my side mirror and saw something standing in the middle of the lot, watching us leave. The image is burned into my brain, but whenever I try to describe it to someone, the words just won't come. We drove non-stop until we reached the next town, where we pulled into a truck stop that was busy with morning traffic. The other driver, his name was Hector, sat with me in the diner, both of us drinking coffee with shaking hands. He told me that rest area had a reputation among truckers. Strange things happened there, especially in the early morning hours. Electronics failed, people reported weird sounds, feelings of being watched. Some drivers flat out refused to stop there. Why didn't anyone warn me? I asked him. Most people think it's just stories, he said, until they experience it themselves. When I checked my truck in the daylight, I found this viscous fluid smeared on my passenger door. Not quite oil, not quite water, like nothing I'd ever seen before. It had an iridescent quality that made me feel sick looking at it. By the time I thought to take a sample, it had evaporated without a trace. My journal was gone from my jacket pocket. I tore apart my cab looking for it, but it had vanished. The only evidence I had was that partial voice recording on my phone, and even that was mostly distorted beyond recognition. I finished my delivery in Sacramento and immediately took a week off. Patricia said I looked like I'd aged 10 years. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't stop checking over my shoulder. I finally broke down and told her everything, expecting her to think I was crazy or drunk or on drugs. Instead, she held me while I cried like a baby. I went back to driving eventually, but I've never returned to that stretch of Highway 95. I reroute every time, even if it costs me hours and money. When I heard they closed that rest area permanently last year, I wasn't surprised. What shocked me was learning about the highway patrol officer who'd been investigating a disappearance there, another trucker who vanished the same night I was there. Sometimes, when I'm driving at night, I still feel like something's pacing me just beyond my headlights. My electronics still act up occasionally, and sometimes I wake up suddenly at exactly 2:58 a.m., heart racing, convinced that something is scraping around the outside of my truck. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know what would have happened if Hector hadn't knocked on my window. All I know is that there are things out there on the lonely highways that don't fit into any category we have words for. And sometimes when the night is at its darkest, they come looking for us. Story 10. I've been sitting on this experience for almost 3 months now, and I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about it. I figured writing it down might help me process what happened, because honestly, I don't think I'll ever be the same after what we found under St. Ellora's. I moved to Westbrook about 2 years ago for work. It's one of those small towns where everybody knows everybody, and outsiders stick out like a sore thumb. Eventually, I made friends with a few guys at work. Michael, Jamie, and Connor. We'd hang out on weekends, have beers, play video games, typical stuff. One night after a few drinks, Jamie brought up this abandoned church called St. Ellora's. According to him, it was this creepy old building about 20 minutes outside of town, hidden deep in the woods off some rarely used country road. At first, I thought it was just another small-town ghost story, but the way the guys talked about it had me curious. "Leo, I'm telling you, there's something not right about that place," Michael said, leaning in like he was sharing some big secret. "My grandpa used to tell me it burned down in like the 1920s. Then they rebuilt it, but it's been abandoned for decades now." Connor nodded, adding, "The graveyard around it is all cracked and falling apart. Nobody goes there except stupid teenagers trying to scare themselves." I'd always been into urban exploration and had checked out a few abandoned buildings back in the city, so naturally I suggested we go see it ourselves. To my surprise, they were hesitant. "There's this local legend," Jamie explained. "The Blue Drum Boy. Supposedly he was a kid drummer who died in some skirmish back in the day. People say his ghost marches through tunnels under the church at night, still playing his drum." I laughed it off. "Come on, guys, you don't actually believe that, do you?" Eventually, they agreed to take me there the following Saturday afternoon, just to check it out in daylight. I guess they figured it would be safer that way. The drive there was exactly as they described. We took this winding country road that looked like it hadn't seen maintenance in years, then turned onto what was basically a dirt path. We had to park and walk the last 10 minutes because the brush was too thick for Michael's car. When St. Alora's finally came into view, I got why people avoided it. The place was downright eerie, even in broad daylight. The stone building was partially collapsed on one side, with vines crawling up the walls and into broken windows. The small graveyard surrounding it was exactly as Connor had described. Headstones tilted at odd angles, some fallen over completely, others so weathered you couldn't read the inscriptions anymore. We walked around the perimeter, taking it all in. The front doors were boarded up, but someone had clearly pried one of the boards loose at some point, leaving just enough space for a person to squeeze through. "Should we go in?" I asked, already moving toward the opening. Jamie grabbed my arm. "Wait, there's something else I want to show you first." He led us around to the back of the church where a small clearing gave way to more woods. There, partially hidden by overgrown weeds, was a wooden panel bolted to the ground. It looked like it was covering some kind of entrance. "What's that?" I asked. Michael shrugged. "Nobody knows for sure. Some people think it leads to old catacombs or storage cellars. Others say it connects to the tunnels from the Blue Drum Boy legend." I crouched down to get a better look, brushing away some of the weeds. That's when I noticed something disturbing. The wood was splintered around the edges, and the bolt that had once secured it was hanging loose. Someone had forced it open recently. "Guys," I said, my heart suddenly racing, "I think someone's been here." Connor came over to look. "Holy shit, you're right. That wasn't like this last time we came by." Against my better judgment, I lifted the broken panel. Below was a dark opening with stone steps descending into blackness. A musty, unpleasant smell wafted up from below. "We should come back with flashlights," Jamie said, clearly uncomfortable. "And maybe during the day." "It is day," I pointed out. "You know what I mean. Earlier, with more people." We agreed to come back better prepared, but my curiosity was definitely piqued. On the drive back, I convinced the guys to tell me everything they knew about the church and the Blue Drum Boy legend. Apparently, the story went that during some historical conflict, the details varied depending on who told it, a young drummer boy took shelter in tunnels beneath what would later become the church. Enemy soldiers found him and killed him there. Since then, people claimed to hear drumming coming from underground, especially at night. "My cousin swears he heard it once," Connor said, like a soft, steady beat coming from somewhere beneath his feet when he was checking out the graveyard at night. I spent the next few days researching online. There wasn't much about St. Alora's specifically, but I did find mentions of underground structures in the area dating back to the 18th century, possibly used for storage or as shelter during conflicts. Nothing concrete about tunnels, though. By Friday, we had a plan. We'd go back at night, partly because it seemed more exciting that way, and partly because we all worked during the day. We gathered flashlights, extra batteries, and even bought a cheap first aid kit from the drugstore. Michael brought a crowbar just in case, though none of us really thought we'd need it. We arrived at St. Alora's around 1:30 in the morning. The place looked completely different in the darkness, the church silhouette looming against the night sky like something from a horror movie. The air felt heavier somehow, and the woods around us were eerily quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just silence. "I'm starting to think this was a bad idea," Jamie muttered as we approached the wooden panel at the back. It was still open, just as we'd left it. The darkness below seemed even more impenetrable at night. "Last chance to back out," Michael said, clicking on his flashlight and shining it down the stone steps. None of us spoke for a moment. Then Connor broke the silence. "Fuck it. We came all this way." I led the way down, my flashlight beam bouncing off the damp stone walls. The steps were narrow and uneven, worn smooth in the middle from years of use. We descended maybe 15 or 20 steps before reaching the bottom. We found ourselves in what looked like a cellar. A low-ceilinged room with stone walls and a dirt floor. Old wooden shelves lined one wall, mostly empty except for a few broken glass jars. In the center of the room stood 3 rusted metal tables arranged in a row. They looked almost like examination tables with straps hanging from the sides. "What the hell were these used for?" Jamie whispered, running his fingers over one of the straps. "Maybe this was some kind of infirmary," I suggested, though it didn't feel right. In one corner, piled in a heap, were what looked like old blankets, stained dark with what I desperately hoped wasn't blood. Glass shards crunched beneath our boots as we moved around the room. That's when Connor's flashlight caught something on the floor, smears that looked disturbingly fresh, leading toward a darkened hallway on the far side of the room. "Guys," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I think that's blood, and it looks recent." My stomach knotted. Maybe an animal got in somehow. Nobody responded to that. We all knew it wasn't likely. Michael pointed his light down the hallway. "It leads that way. We should have left right then." Every instinct was screaming at me to get out, but somehow curiosity overcame fear. We followed the hallway, which sloped gently downward for about 30 feet before ending at an iron grate. The grate had once been secured with a heavy chain, but someone had cut through it. The blood trail continued beyond. "Someone definitely came through here," I said, pushing the grate open with a loud creak that echoed down the tunnel. Beyond the grate was a small chamber with a rusted metal ladder descending into a larger tunnel below. The ladder was attached to the wall but looked extremely old and corroded. "I'll go first," Michael volunteered. Tucking his flashlight under his arm and grabbing the top rung, he made it about halfway down before one of the rungs snapped with a sharp crack. He managed to catch himself, but the sudden movement caused the entire ladder to shift ominously. "Careful," Jamie called from above. "That thing's not stable." Michael continued more cautiously, making it to the bottom. Jamie went next, then me. Connor was last, and he was about 6 feet from the bottom when disaster struck. 2 rungs broke in succession, and the whole ladder tore away from the wall with a horrible screech of metal. Connor fell, landing hard on the stone floor below with a sickening crunch and a scream of pain. "Connor!" We all rushed to him. He was conscious but clearly in agony, clutching at both legs. "My ankles," he gasped. "I think they're broken, both of them." We shined our lights on his legs. His feet were bent at unnatural angles, and he couldn't move them without screaming. We were at least 20 feet underground with no way back up the way we came, and our friend couldn't walk. "We need to get help," Jamie said, pulling out his phone. "No signal? Shit." "There has to be another way out," Michael said, trying to stay calm. "These tunnels have to lead somewhere." We fashioned a makeshift splint for Connor's ankles, using pieces of the broken ladder and strips torn from Jamie's jacket. Then Michael and I hoisted him up between us, one arm over each of our shoulders, while Jamie led the way with 2 flashlights. The tunnel stretched ahead of us, curving slightly to the left. The walls were rough-hewn stone, damp with moisture that glistened in our flashlight beams. As we moved deeper, I noticed something disturbing. Scratch marks in the stone as if made by fingernails. Some were low to the ground, like they'd been made by someone crawling. "Don't look at those," Michael muttered when he saw me staring. Connor was trying to be brave, but each step jarred his broken ankles and I could feel him trembling with pain. We'd gone maybe 100 yards when Jamie stopped abruptly. "What the hell is that?" Our lights illuminated a bizarre sight. A pile of children's shoes stacked against one wall. Not modern sneakers, but old-fashioned leather shoes. Dozens of them, small sizes mostly, covered in decades of dust. "This is seriously fucked up," Jamie whispered. We pressed on, the tunnel widening slightly before splitting in 2 directions. The blood trail we'd been following led to the right, so we followed it. The air grew colder and damper the further we went, and I could have sworn I heard something in the distance. Not drumming, but a faint, rhythmic sound I couldn't quite identify. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, we reached another chamber. This one had a ladder leading up to what looked like a trap door in the ceiling. The blood trail ended at the foot of the ladder. "I'll check it out," Michael said, carefully transferring Connor's weight fully to me. He climbed the ladder, which seemed sturdier than the last one, and pushed at the trap door. It opened with a creak, and he disappeared through it. For a few agonizing minutes, Jamie, Connor, and I waited in silence. Then Michael's face reappeared in the opening. "It's some kind of storeroom," he called down, his voice strange and tight. "But guys, there's someone up here." "Someone alive?" Jamie asked. Michael shook his head. "No, he's dead. Been dead a while from the smell, but not years or anything." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean? Who is it?" "I don't know. Some guy. He's curled up in the corner. There's a needle still in his arm. An overdose. Someone had found their way into these tunnels to shoot up and never made it out." "Is there a way out up there?" Connor asked through gritted teeth. "Yeah, there's a door. Leads outside somewhere. I think we can get out that way." One by one, we made our way up the ladder, Jamie and I basically carrying Connor. The storeroom was small, with shelves lining the walls holding old cans and jars. And there, just as Michael had said, was a man's body curled in the fetal position in one corner. He was wearing jeans and a hoodie, his face turned toward the wall. I couldn't bring myself to look closely. The door led outside to what looked like an old shed about a quarter-mile from the church, hidden in the trees. We emerged into the cool night air, grateful to be above ground again. We took Connor to the emergency room, making up a story about falling through a rotted barn floor while exploring. The doctors didn't question it much, probably used to idiots hurting themselves doing stupid things. I haven't been back to St. Alora's since that night. None of us have. We reported finding the body anonymously, but I don't know what happened after that. I don't want to know. The thing that haunts me isn't the blue drum boy or any ghost story. It's the reality of what we found. A real person who died alone in the darkness beneath a forgotten church. Someone who crawled down there to hide away from the world and never came back. And sometimes at night I still think I can hear that faint, rhythmic sound we heard in the tunnels. Not drumming, I realized later, but the slow drip of water on stone, echoing in empty passages where no one should ever go. Story 11. I can't stop thinking about what happened last week. My hands are still shaking as I type this. I need to get this off my chest because I haven't been able to sleep properly since that night, and I'm hoping someone here might have experienced something similar or can offer some explanation. My sister Eleanor and I were bored out of our minds last Friday evening. Our parents were away for the weekend visiting relatives, so we had the house to ourselves. Elena is 19, 2 years older than me, and she's always been into paranormal stuff. I'm Maya, by the way. We live in this small town in Eastern Europe that's honestly pretty boring most of the time. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and the most exciting thing that happens is when someone gets a new car. Our house is on the edge of town, and there's this dense forest about half a kilometer west of us. 3 of our friends from school live in houses scattered along the forest edge. So anyway, Elena had downloaded this Spirit Box app on her phone a few days earlier. She'd been watching these paranormal investigation videos on YouTube and wanted to try something called the Estes method. Basically, one person wears headphones connected to the Spirit Box and gets blindfolded, while the other person asks questions. The idea is that the blindfolded person can't hear the questions, so if they respond to them correctly through the Spirit Box, it might be evidence of something paranormal. I was skeptical, but figured what the hell, it might be fun. It was around 9 in the evening when we started. We dimmed the lights in our living room and sat on the floor. Elena went first. She put in her earbuds, connected them to her phone with the Spirit Box app running, and I tied one of her scarves around her eyes as a blindfold. "Can you hear me?" I asked her. "Nope, just static and random words," she replied. I started with simple questions. "Is anyone here with us?" Nothing happened for a few minutes, just Elena occasionally mentioning random words coming through the static. I was already getting bored and was about to suggest we quit when Elena suddenly stiffened. "Help," she said. "I keep hearing help over and over." A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to stay calm. "Who's speaking to us?" I asked. Elena was quiet for a moment. Words coming through, attached. "Attached to what?" I asked, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. Red hair, Elena said almost immediately. My stomach dropped. Elena had dyed her hair bright red just a month ago. It was still a vibrant color that stood out in our small town. No one else we knew had that exact shade. Are you attached to my sister? I asked, my mouth going dry. Elena nodded slowly. Yes, that's what it's saying, just yes, very clearly. My hands were getting clammy, but I pressed on. How many of you are there? Elena tilted her head, listening. We are here. It said, we are here. Not a number, just we. Are you in this house with us? I asked, looking around the room nervously. Forest, Elena replied. Come find us. It's saying forest and come find us. I felt like someone had poured ice water down my back. The forest near our house had always creeped me out, especially at night. It was dense and dark, and there were all sorts of local legends about it. Why should we come to the forest? I asked. Elena suddenly jerked like she was startled. He's coming, she said. Run. It's saying run now. Who's coming? I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Don't speak of him, Elena replied, her voice dropping to a whisper. That's exactly what it said. Don't speak of him. I decided to change the subject. How did you die? I asked, assuming I was talking to a ghost or spirit. Elena was quiet for almost a minute before responding. Bombing. That hit me hard because there was actual history behind it. Our town had been affected during World War II, and back in 2006, a contractor renovating one of the old buildings on Main Street had discovered several unexploded hand grenades in the walls. Our history teacher had told us about it. Apparently, people had hidden weapons and explosives in their homes during the occupation. At this point, my nerves were shot, but I was also curious. I suggested we switch roles. Elena took off the blindfold and earbuds, and I put them on. The static in my ears was loud and disorienting. Random snippets of words came through, but nothing coherent at first. Elena started asking questions, and I tried to focus on the sounds coming through the earbuds. Then I heard it clearly. Run. Just that one word, over and over. Get out. Who's speaking to us? Elena asked. Danger, I heard through the static. Not safe. Who is Maya supposed to run from? Elena asked. The reply came immediately. Her. Are you afraid of me? Elena asked. No, came the reply. Then, dark hair. That was weird because I have dark hair, almost black. It sounded like whatever was coming through was afraid of me, not Elena. Why are you afraid of my sister? Elena asked. I didn't hear an answer to that. Instead, the static grew louder, and then I heard a man's voice, deep and commanding. Get out. It was so loud that I yanked the earbuds out and tore off the blindfold. What happened? Elena asked, looking worried. I told her what I'd heard, and we both sat there in silence for a few minutes. The atmosphere in the house felt different somehow, heavier, like the air before a thunderstorm. Maybe we should take a break, Elena suggested. We went to the kitchen and made some tea. Neither of us wanted to admit how freaked out we were, but I could see it in Elena's eyes. After about 30 minutes, I suggested we try one more time, with me wearing the earbuds again. I was scared, but I also felt like we needed to understand what was happening. This time, as soon as I put the earbuds in, I heard "not safe" clearly through the static, then "run" and "get out" again. When Elena asked questions, I couldn't hear specific answers anymore, just those warnings repeating. After 10 minutes of this, I'd had enough. We shut everything down and turned all the lights back on. We spent the rest of the night trying to make sense of what had happened, piecing together the messages we'd received. From what we could gather, there were spirits or entities that had somehow become attached to Elena, specifically because of her red hair. They were in or connected to the forest nearby. They seemed afraid of me for some reason related to my dark hair, and there was something or someone else that frightened them, the him they wouldn't speak of. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept looking out my window toward the forest, half expecting to see something moving among the trees. Elena slept in my room because she was too scared to be alone. The next morning, we tried to convince ourselves it was just a stupid app generating random words that we'd connected into a narrative because of our overactive imaginations. But deep down, I don't think either of us believe that. 3 days later, Elena told me she'd been hearing whispers when she was alone, just on the edge of hearing, like someone was standing just behind her, murmuring. And twice now, I've woken up in the middle of the night with the overwhelming feeling that someone is standing in the corner of my bedroom watching me. We haven't told our parents. What would we even say? Hey, we might have contacted some spirits that are now attached to Elena because of her hair color. And by the way, there's something dangerous in the forest that even the spirits are afraid of. The worst part is that 2 nights ago I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth when I looked in the mirror and could have sworn I saw someone with red eyes standing behind me. When I turned around, no one was there, but the air felt ice cold for a few seconds. Yesterday, Eleanor's friend Marta, who lives near the forest, called to ask if we'd been near her house recently. She said her dog had been barking at nothing for the past few days, always facing in the direction of our house. When Elena said no, Marta mentioned that she'd been hearing strange noises from the forest at night, like someone calling her name. I don't know what we've done, what we've invited into our lives. I'm writing this because I'm scared and don't know what to do. Has anyone else ever experienced anything like this with a spirit box? Is there a way to undo whatever connection we've made? I can hear Elena crying in her room right now. She says she feels like she's being watched constantly. And just before I started writing this, I got a text from our friend Thomas, who also lives near the forest. All it said was, "Did you guys go into the forest last night? I saw flashlights moving between the trees around midnight, heading toward town. We were both home all night." Story 12. I've been a wilderness guide for almost 11 years now, mostly operating out of the Pacific Northwest. I've done solo treks through some pretty remote areas, handled wildlife encounters, and weathered storms that would make most people never want to set foot outside again. But what happened to me 3 months ago in Pine Hollow, I still can't explain it. And I'm not sure I want to. For those unfamiliar with the area, Pine Hollow is about 40 miles from the nearest town, with an old abandoned railway line that's been converted into a hiking trail. It cuts through dense forest that hasn't seen much human activity since the logging operations pulled out in the 70s. I'd heard about it from another guide who mentioned the unusual landscape. Supposedly, the trees grow at weird angles because of some strange wind patterns in the valley. I had a week off between guided tours and decided to check it out myself. Solo hiking is my therapy. Always has been. When you spend most of your working life responsible for groups of tourists, there's nothing better than answering to nobody but yourself for a few days. The drive to the trailhead took longer than expected. My GPS lost signal about 3 miles before I reached the small gravel lot where I parked my truck. It was mid-afternoon when I finally started hiking, my pack loaded with enough supplies for 3 days. The plan was to follow the old railway line for about 12 miles, then loop back on a different trail. Something felt off from the moment I stepped onto the path. I've been in hundreds of forests, and they all have their own, I don't know, personality. This one felt wrong. The trees really did grow at strange angles, not just bent by wind, but twisted in ways that seemed deliberate, like they were straining away from something. The silence was what got to me first. Most forests are full of sound, birds, insects, leaves rustling. Here, it was like everything was holding its breath. I could hear my boots on the gravel path and my own breathing, but nothing else. I told myself it was just an unusual microclimate or something, but that explanation felt hollow. I hiked about 8 miles that first day. The trail gradually narrowed as it went deeper into the forest, with the twisted pines closing in on either side. By late afternoon, the path was barely visible in places, overgrown with weeds and fallen branches. I started looking for a place to camp around 6 o'clock. About half a mile off the main trail, I found a small clearing near a stream. Perfect spot, flat ground, water source, enough open space to set up my tent comfortably. I got everything set up, filtered some water, and cooked a simple meal on my portable stove. All very routine. As the daylight faded, that sense of wrongness intensified. The shadows between the trees seemed darker than they should be, almost solid. I'm not someone who spooks easily. I've camped alone in grizzly country without batting an eye, but something about this place had me on edge. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like I was being watched. I tried to shake it off, started a small campfire, ate my dinner, did some reading on my Kindle. Normal stuff, but I couldn't relax. By 10, I put out the fire and crawled into my tent, hoping sleep would reset my nerves. I must have dozed off eventually because I remember waking up suddenly. My watch said it was just after midnight. Something had pulled me from sleep. Not a dream, but a sound. I lay completely still, listening. There it was again. The deliberate crunch of leaves under weight, a twig snapping. Not the random sounds of forest animals. These were measured, purposeful. Whatever was making them was large and moving slowly. My first thought was bear, but bears don't move like that. They crash through undergrowth, not caring about noise. This was different. The footsteps were spaced like a human's, but heavier. They were circling my campsite. I reached for my flashlight, but stopped myself. Some instinct told me it was better to remain undetected. Instead, I gripped my hunting knife and stayed perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. The footsteps continued their circuit around my tent, maintaining the same distance, maybe 15 feet away. One circuit, 2, 3. Each time the pattern was identical. Whatever it was studying the perimeter of my camp with methodical precision. I tried to convince myself it was another hiker playing a sick joke, but I knew better. No one else was out here. After what seemed like forever, the footsteps stopped directly opposite the entrance to my tent. I could feel its presence through the thin nylon fabric, a pressure in the air, a sense of malevolent attention focused directly on me. My heart was hammering so hard, I was sure it must be audible. Then came the sound that still haunts my nightmares, a low, guttural murmuring. Not words exactly, but something that had the cadence of speech. It wasn't human, it wasn't animal either. It was something in between, something that shouldn't exist. The sound seemed to vibrate through my chest, setting my teeth on edge. I've heard elk bugle, wolves howl, mountain lions scream. I know what animals in these forests sound like. This was wrong. Imagine someone trying to mimic human speech without understanding language, but with a vocal structure that wasn't designed for it. That's the closest I can come to describing it. The murmuring continued for maybe 20 seconds, then stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I strained my ears, trying to determine where it was, what it was doing. For several minutes, there was nothing. I started to wonder if it had left. Then the footsteps resumed, still circling, but closer now, maybe 8 feet from my tent. I clutched my knife harder, knowing it would be useless if whatever was out there decided to come in. My training told me to make noise, to appear large and threatening, standard procedure for predator encounters, but some deeper instinct overrode that. Making myself known would be a fatal mistake. Another circuit, another, each taking exactly the same time, moving at exactly the same pace. No animal hunts like that, no human either. The precision was terrifying. Then it changed pattern. The footsteps moved away from my tent toward the stream. I heard splashing, like something large wading through water, then silence again. I lay there, straining to hear anything. Minutes passed. 5, 10. Nothing. I began to think maybe it had moved on. That's when I heard the breathing, right outside my tent, so close that the fabric moved slightly with each exhale, hot, moist air pushing through the nylon near my head. Whatever it was right there, separated from me by nothing but a thin sheet of fabric. I've never been more certain I was about to die. My body was rigid with fear, sweat soaking through my clothes despite the cool night air. The breathing continued, deep and rhythmic, not the panting of an animal, but controlled, deliberate. It sniffed. Long, powerful inhalations, like it was trying to catch my scent through the tent. I could hear the wet sound of nostrils flaring. Then the murmuring started again, louder this time, almost conversational in its rhythm. like it was talking to me, or about me. This continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, without warning, it crashed away through the underbrush. The sound of breaking branches and heavy footfalls receded into the distance until I couldn't hear it anymore. I didn't move for at least an hour, didn't dare. When I finally convinced myself it wasn't coming back, I still couldn't bring myself to leave the tent. I lay there until the first grey light of dawn filtered through the trees, my knife still clutched in my white-knuckled hand. As soon as it was light enough to see, I unzipped the tent and looked outside. The clearing looked normal at first glance, but then I saw them. Footprints, large, human-like prints circling where my tent had been, exactly as I'd heard them. But these weren't human tracks. They were too large, too deep, with toes that seemed too long and a strange asymmetry to the arch. Most disturbing of all, there was a second set, a perfect circle about 8 feet out, just as I'd heard, and a third track leading from the stream directly to where I'd heard the breathing outside my tent. The methodical hunting pattern was there in the dirt, confirming everything I'd experienced. I didn't bother with breakfast or breaking down camp properly. I stuffed my sleeping bag into my pack, grabbed my essential gear, and practically ran back to the trail. The whole time, I felt watched. The trees seemed to lean inward, tracking my movement. That oppressive silence remained, broken only by my panicked breathing and the sound of my boots on the path. I made it back to my truck in just under 3 hours, a journey that had taken me twice that long the day before. I drove away from Pine Hollow with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, constantly checking the rearview mirror. I've tried to rationalize what happened, tried to convince myself it was a bear, a mountain lion, even another hiker playing a cruel joke. None of those explanations fit what I experienced. Whatever was hunting me that night wasn't something science has a name for. I've been back to work since then, leading groups on safe established trails far from Pine Hollow. I haven't told any of my colleagues about what happened. How could I? They'd think I was crazy or that I was making it up, but I know what I heard. I know what I saw. Sometimes at night, I still hear that guttural murmuring in my dreams. I wake up certain something is circling my bedroom, hunting me with that same methodical patience. I've started sleeping with the lights on, my knife within reach. I don't know what's out there in those twisted woods. I don't want to know, but I'm certain of one thing. It's still there, circling, hunting, waiting for the next person who wanders into its territory. Story 13. I still get goosebumps thinking about this, even though it's been 14 years. I've never told this story fully because I sound crazy when I try, but I need to get this off my chest. Back in 2009, I was 19 and had just graduated from high school in Deming, New Mexico. For those who don't know, Deming is a small town near the Mexican border, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and there's not much to do except drive around at night. During my senior year, I drove my girlfriend Maria home a few times a week. She lived out near Hermanas Road, this awful dirt road that's maybe 2 football fields long. Anyone from Deming knows Hermanas. It's infamous for destroying tires and shaking vehicles like they're in a blender. During the day, it's just a crappy road, but at night, it turns pitch black except for the occasional house light from scattered ranches. No street lights, nothing. For months, everything was normal. I'd drop Maria off, turn around at the end of Hermanas, and head back home in my 2000 Nissan Frontier. Nothing weird ever happened. But then, about a month after graduation, everything changed. The first incident wasn't even directly related to me. Maria and I were driving down Hermanas around 10 at night when we noticed something in the brush alongside the road. As we got closer, we realized it was a car that had flipped over and was partially hidden in the mesquite. I immediately pulled over and we ran to check if anyone was hurt. Inside was this kid, probably 17, bleeding from his hand and looking completely shell-shocked. We helped him out and called 911. While waiting for the ambulance, I asked him what happened. All he kept saying was, "I don't know, man. I just lost control. The car, it just lost control." He wasn't drunk or high, just terrified and confused. I didn't think much of it at the time. People crash on rural roads all the time, especially teenagers, but looking back, that was the beginning. About 2 weeks later, I was driving alone down Hermanas around sunset. About halfway down the road, I spotted something on the side that made me slow down. It was a dead pit bull. Now, finding dead animals in rural New Mexico isn't uncommon, but something about this was off. The dog wasn't just lying there, it was posed almost. Its limbs were splayed out dramatically, like someone had arranged it that way. It creeped me out, but I figured maybe it had been hit by a car and thrown into that position. The weird part came later that night when I drove back down the same road after hanging out with friends. The dog was gone. Completely gone. No blood, no fur, nothing. It was like it had never been there. Now I know what you're thinking. Maybe someone picked it up. But who? Animal control doesn't come out that fast in rural areas, especially at night, and it would have been heavy, at least 60 pounds. I tried to brush it off, but it bothered me. Why would someone move a dead dog in the middle of the night? The second incident happened about 3 weeks later. It was around 1 in the morning, and I was driving home alone after dropping Maria off. Hermanas Road was especially dark that night. No moon, just my headlights cutting through the blackness. About 3/4 of the way down the road, I saw someone on the side frantically waving their arms, trying to flag me down. My first instinct was to stop and help. This is rural New Mexico, people help each other out. But as I slowed down and got closer, the person just stopped. They dropped their arms, looked at me with this strange expression I couldn't make out in the darkness, and then stepped back. And I swear on everything I care about, they disappeared. Not like they ran away or hid in the brush. They literally vanished as I was looking directly at them. I freaked out. I hit the gas and got the hell out of there, my heart racing so fast I thought I might pass out. When I got home, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that figure in my mind. The way they moved wasn't normal. It was jerky, almost like stop motion. For the next month, I avoided Hermanas Road when possible. I'd take the long way around to Maria's house, adding 20 minutes to my drive. She thought I was being ridiculous, and maybe I was, but something about that road wasn't right. Then came the third incident, the one that made me swear off Hermanas Road for good. It was July, about 2 months after graduation. Maria and I had been at a friend's house watching movies, and it got late, around midnight. She needed to get home, and I was tired of adding 20 minutes to our drive, so I decided to face my fears and take Hermanas. Everything seemed normal at first. The road was bumpy as usual, making my truck shake and rattle. The night was clear, stars everywhere. We were about halfway down Hermanas when my truck started shaking more violently than usual. I slowed down, thinking I'd hit a particularly bad patch, but the shaking got worse, much worse. The steering wheel began to vibrate so hard it hurt my hands. Maria asked what was wrong, and I remember saying, "I don't know, maybe a flat tire," but I knew it wasn't a flat. This was different. Then I felt it. It's hard to describe without sounding insane, but it felt like something was pushing my truck. Not wind. This was a physical force, like hands on the side of my vehicle. The truck started to accelerate on its own. I hit the brakes, but they felt mushy and unresponsive. We were picking up speed, heading straight for the ditch on the right side of the road. Maria was screaming now, holding onto the dashboard. I was fighting with the steering wheel, trying to keep us on the road. The truck kept veering right toward the ditch, like something was determined to run us off the road. The speedometer hit 55, then 60, way too fast for a dirt road. I was stomping on the brakes with both feet now, but it was like they weren't connected to anything. The truck was completely out of my control. I remember thinking we were going to die, that whatever got that kid who flipped his car was going to get us too. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that something supernatural was happening. This wasn't mechanical failure. This was something else. Then, as suddenly as it started, the truck slammed to a stop. The front end hit some mesquite bushes, and everything went quiet. The engine was still running, but the violent shaking had stopped. Maria was crying, asking what happened. I couldn't answer her because I didn't know. I put the truck in reverse, backed up slowly, and then floored it. We got off Hermanus Road in record time and I took the long way to Maria's house. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. When I got home that night, I checked my truck from top to bottom. Tires were fine. Brakes worked perfectly. There was nothing mechanically wrong that could explain what happened, and that scared me more than anything. I never drove down Hermanus Road again after that night. Maria and I broke up a few months later, not because of the incident, but she never really believed me about what happened. She thought I'd panicked or fallen asleep at the wheel. For years, I avoided even thinking about Hermanus Road. I moved away to Las Cruces for college, then to Albuquerque for work. I convinced myself it was just a weird night, a mechanical issue I couldn't identify, combined with my imagination running wild. Then, 4 years ago, when I was 33, I visited my family in Deming. My brother needed to pick something up from a friend who lived off Hermanus. It was broad daylight, so I reluctantly agreed to go with him. As soon as we turned onto that dirt road, all the fear came rushing back. My palms started sweating, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. My brother noticed and asked what was wrong. I couldn't explain it to him. How do you tell someone you think a road is haunted? That some entity or force tried to kill you there? So I just said I wasn't feeling well. As we drove, I kept scanning the sides of the road, half expecting to see that figure waving its arms or that posed pit bull. There was nothing unusual, just the same old bumpy dirt road in the harsh New Mexico sunlight. But the dread was overwhelming. That's when it hit me. The kid we'd helped years before, the one whose car had flipped. He'd said he lost control, but his face showed more than just the shock of an accident. He looked like someone who'd seen something impossible. I wondered if he'd felt the same force I did, if something on Hermanus Road had tried to claim him too. I've researched local legends since then, trying to find any history about Hermanus Road. There's nothing official, but I've heard whispers from older locals, stories about cars veering off for no reason, about people seeing figures that disappear. Some say it's the spirit of someone who died there long ago. Others think it's something that was never human to begin with. I don't know what happened on Hermanus Road. I don't know what wanted to pull my truck into that ditch or why it suddenly stopped. All I know is that whatever it was real, and it's still there, waiting on that dark stretch of dirt road for the next person to drive by. I still live in Albuquerque now, and I haven't been back to Deming in years. But sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night and pass a particularly dark stretch of road, I get that same feeling, like something's watching, waiting, and my hands grip the steering wheel a little tighter. Story 14. I still can't explain what happened, and I'm not usually the type to believe in supernatural stuff. But this experience changed everything for me, and I've been trying to make sense of it ever since. This all started when I was 16. My sister Kimberly and I were living with our mom and her husband, my stepdad, in this small ranch-style house in Westbrook. It's one of those towns where everyone knows everyone and nothing exciting ever happens. My stepdad worked as a mover, which meant he was always bringing home random stuff people didn't want anymore. One Friday after school, he came home with this brightly colored Marilyn Monroe canvas painting. It wasn't anything special, just one of those mass-produced pop art things you'd find at a discount home store. The colors were super vibrant though, lots of pinks, blues, and yellows. My stepdad thought I'd like it since I was going through this phase where I was obsessed with old Hollywood. Found this while clearing out an estate today, he said, leaning it against the wall. Thought you might want it for your room. I remember being pretty excited about it. My room was pretty boring, just white walls with a few band posters, so having something colorful seemed cool. Kim didn't care much for it, but I immediately decided I'd hang it above my bed. The weird thing was how my mom reacted when she saw it. She got this look on her face, not quite disgust, but definitely not happy. She didn't say anything directly, just asked, "Are you sure you want that thing in your room?" I figured she just thought it was tacky or something. Despite her reaction, I hung it up that same evening. It looked good against my plain walls, and I remember feeling pretty satisfied as I got ready for bed that night. I had no idea what was coming. That first night was when everything started. I fell asleep easily enough, but then the nightmares began. Not just regular bad dreams. These were different. They felt so real, and there was this weight of dread that I can't even explain properly. In the first nightmare, I was lying in my bed exactly like I had fallen asleep. Everything looked normal except the painting above me. In the dream, Marilyn's eyes were open way too wide and they were following me. I tried to move but couldn't. That sleep paralysis feeling, you know. Then I felt my mattress starting to sink. Not just a little, but like it was being pulled down through the floor. I could feel myself being dragged down with it straight into our basement. Our basement in real life was just a regular unfinished space. Concrete floors, exposed beams, washer and dryer in the corner. But in this dream, it was pitch black. Not just dark, but a complete absence of light. I could feel myself sinking into this void, and the panic was overwhelming. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was being crushed. Then I heard something moving in the darkness, something small and fast, scuttling across the concrete. I couldn't see it, but I could hear its nails clicking as it moved closer to me. I finally broke free of the paralysis and tried to run toward where I knew the stairs should be. The whole time, this small black creature was right behind me. I could feel its breath on my ankles. I woke up gasping for air, my sheets soaked with sweat. It took me several minutes to calm down enough to realize it was just a dream. The painting was still there, looking completely normal in the moonlight coming through my window. I told myself it was just a random nightmare and tried to go back to sleep. The next night was even worse. This time, I dreamed I was standing in front of my mirror, but my reflection wasn't quite right. It was me, but something was off about my face. My reflection started smiling, even though I wasn't smiling. Then its mouth opened wider and wider until it split its face. The worst part, I could feel my actual face trying to do the same thing. The pain was excruciating, like my skin was tearing. I woke up screaming, my hands clawing at my face. The third night, I had the basement dream again, but this time I could see the creature. It was small and black, with too many limbs and these glowing red eyes. I've never felt terror like that before or since. By Sunday morning, I was a complete wreck. I hadn't gotten any real sleep for 3 nights. I was jumpy, irritable, and exhausted. My mom noticed at breakfast and asked what was wrong, but I just blamed it on school stress. I didn't want to sound crazy talking about nightmares at 16. But I was starting to make a connection in my head. The nightmares had started the exact night I'd hung up that painting. I kept looking at it, trying to see if there was anything obviously wrong with it. But it was just a regular painting. Still, every time I glanced at it, I felt this weird sense of unease crawling up my spine. I tried to dismiss the idea. It seemed so ridiculous. A cursed painting that was straight out of a cheesy horror movie. I figured I was just letting my imagination run wild because I was tired. Monday night came, and I was dreading going to sleep. Sure enough, another nightmare hit. This time I was trapped inside the painting itself, with the real Marilyn Monroe standing outside looking in at me. Except it wasn't really Marilyn. Her face kept shifting and changing into something inhuman. She was scratching at the canvas, trying to get in at me. I could hear the sound of her nails against the surface, getting louder and louder until it sounded like she was inside my head. I woke up crying. It was 3 in the morning, and I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and turned the painting to face the wall. It felt childish, but I needed to do something. I managed to get a couple hours of fitful sleep after that. Tuesday after school, my mom found me sitting on my bed just staring at the wall where the painting hung. She sat down next to me and asked what was going on. I finally broke down and told her everything. All the nightmares, the feeling of dread, how it all started right after hanging up the painting. Instead of laughing or telling me I was being silly, she got really quiet. Then she said something that sent chills down my spine. I had a bad feeling about that thing the minute it came into the house. She suggested we test my theory. She would take the painting and hang it in her room for a night. If nothing happened, then we'd know it was just coincidence. If she had nightmares too, well then we'd have to figure out what to do. I was so relieved not to have it in my room that night. For the first time in days, I slept soundly. No nightmares, no waking up in terror. But at breakfast the next morning, my mom looked just as bad as I had been looking. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her hands were shaking as she poured her coffee. "You had nightmares too, didn't you?" I asked. She nodded, not meeting my eyes. 3 of them, one after another. In one, I was in our backyard, and there were these kittens. They looked sick, and they were covered in flies. I tried to help them, but they just fell apart in my hands. Her voice broke. There was this feeling of complete dread, like something horrible was about to happen and I couldn't stop it. We didn't need any more convincing after that. Mom took the painting down immediately and put it in the garage while she figured out what to do with it. She didn't want to donate it. The idea of passing whatever this was onto someone else horrified her. But she also didn't want to just throw it in the trash where someone might find it and take it home. That night, even with the painting out of the house, I still felt uneasy. I kept waking up, convinced I could hear something moving around in the walls. Mom later told me she felt the same way, like something had gotten into our house and hadn't left with the painting. The next day after work, Mom put the painting in the trunk of her car. She said she was going to take it to the dump herself to make sure it was properly disposed of. I felt relieved just knowing it would be gone soon. But 2 days later, I noticed the painting was still in her trunk when I was helping unload groceries. When I asked her about it, she looked embarrassed. "I just haven't had time to go to the dump," she said, but I could tell there was more to it. Later that night, I overheard her talking to my stepdad. "I can't explain it," she was saying. "Every time I drive there, I get this overwhelming feeling that I shouldn't, like something bad will happen if I try to destroy it." The painting stayed in her trunk for another week. Mom became increasingly agitated, saying she could feel it there, even when she was in the house. She said it was like it was calling to her. Finally, she made a decision. I remember it clearly. It was a Tuesday evening, and she came home looking both relieved and guilty. "I got rid of it," she told me, her voice low so Kim and my stepdad wouldn't hear. "I drove to the other side of town and left it at the end of someone's driveway on garbage day. I couldn't bear to have it near us anymore." We never talked about it again after that. The nightmares stopped, and life went back to normal. My stepdad never asked what happened to the painting, which seemed strange in retrospect. Years later, when I was home from college, I finally asked Mom about it again. She got that same uncomfortable look on her face. "You know what the strangest thing was?" she said quietly. "After I left it on that driveway, I drove around the block because I felt guilty about dumping it on someone else. When I passed by again, it was already gone. Someone had taken it. Sometimes I still wonder about who has it now and if they're having the same dreams." I still think about that painting sometimes. I've tried researching similar experiences online, looking for explanations, but nothing quite matches what we went through. All I know is that something was attached to that artwork, something that didn't want to let go, and somewhere out there, that Marilyn Monroe painting might still be hanging above someone's bed, waiting for night to fall. Story 15. I've always loved camping. Growing up in upstate New York, the Adirondacks were practically my second home. My dad taught me how to fish, how to build a proper fire, how to identify edible plants, all that outdoorsy stuff. I thought I knew everything about those woods. I was wrong. This happened last summer. Me and 3 of my buddies, Ryan, Mike, and Steve, decided to escape the city for a weekend. We'd been planning this trip for months, talking about how we needed to reconnect with nature and unplug from the digital world. Typical city guy talk, right? We were all so caught up in our jobs, relationships, and the general chaos of urban life that we desperately needed some time away. I knew this spot deep in the Adirondacks that's not on any trail maps. My grandfather showed it to me when I was a teenager. It's about a 4-hour hike from the nearest parking area, following a creek upstream until you reach this perfect little clearing surrounded by old pine trees. No cell service, no other campers, just pure wilderness. I'd been there maybe 5 or 6 times before, and it had always been peaceful. We reached the spot around mid-afternoon. The weather was perfect, warm but not hot, with a light breeze keeping the bugs away. We set up our tents, gathered firewood, and Mike caught a couple of decent-sized trout from the creek. By early evening we had a good fire going and were drinking beers, grilling the fish and swapping stories. Everything was exactly how a camping trip should be. As the sun set though, I started feeling off. At first I couldn't pinpoint why. The others were getting louder as they drank more, laughing at Ryan's stupid work stories and Mike's relationship drama. But I kept finding myself distracted, glancing toward the trees surrounding our clearing. It felt like someone was watching us. "You okay, Jake?" Steve asked, noticing I'd gone quiet. "Yeah, just tired from the hike," I lied, cracking open another beer. But I couldn't shake this weird feeling. Around 10 o'clock, when it was fully dark and our fire was roaring, I heard it for the first time, rustling in the underbrush about 30 yards behind my tent. Not the random, occasional rustling you'd expect from woodland creatures going about their business. This was deliberate. Stop-start, purposeful. "You guys hear that?" I asked, interrupting Mike mid-sentence. "Hear what?" Ryan looked annoyed. I pointed toward the darkness. "Something moving around out there." Steve laughed. "Probably just a deer, man, or a raccoon looking for scraps." I nodded, trying to convince myself he was right. But the rustling continued, and worse. It seemed to be moving. Not away from us, but around us, circling our campsite. By 11, I couldn't focus on the conversation anymore. The rustling had multiplied. It wasn't just coming from one direction now, but from all around us, like we were being surrounded. And then I saw them. Tiny pinpricks of light reflecting our fire, just at the edge of the darkness. Eyes, dozens of pairs, all fixed on our campsite. "Guys," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "Look at the tree line, all around." They finally stopped talking and looked. Ryan saw them first. "Whoa, that's a lot of... what are those, raccoons?" As if responding to their name being called, they emerged from the darkness. Raccoons, but not like any raccoons I'd ever seen. There must have been 20 or 30 of them, moving in a tight formation, almost like soldiers. They didn't scurry randomly like normal raccoons would. They moved with purpose, with coordination, and their leader, I'll never forget it. At the front was the biggest raccoon I've ever seen, probably twice the size of the others. Its fur was matted and patchy, and its eyes weren't the usual dark beads, but yellowish, almost glowing in the firelight. It stood upright on its hind legs at the edge of our clearing, just staring at us. "Shit, that's a big one," Mike said, laughing nervously. "Maybe we should put the food away." But I knew this wasn't about food. We'd hung our supplies in a tree. Standard procedure to keep bears away. The raccoons weren't looking at where our food was stored. They were looking at us, at our tents, at our gear spread around the campsite. The leader made a series of clicking sounds, not loud, but sharp and distinct. Immediately the group split into smaller units of 3 or 4, each heading toward different parts of our camp. It was like watching a military operation unfold. "What the hell?" Steve stood up, waving his arms. "Get out of here." The raccoons didn't even flinch. They just kept coming, their movements perfectly synchronized. Some headed toward our tents, others toward our backpacks propped against logs around the fire. "This isn't normal," I said, grabbing a burning stick from the fire. "Raccoons don't behave like this." Ryan laughed, but it sounded forced. "Maybe they're rabid or something." But they didn't look rabid. Rabid animals are erratic, aggressive, foaming at the mouth. These raccoons were calm, methodical, and working together with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. I moved toward one group that was inspecting my backpack, waving the fiery stick. "Hey, get away from there." That's when the leader looked directly at me. And I swear, I know how this sounds, but I swear it smiled. Not the way an animal bares its teeth in aggression, but an actual smile of recognition, like it knew exactly who I was and what I was doing. It held my gaze for several seconds, then made another clicking sound followed by a low grunt. The raccoons near my backpack immediately changed tactics. Instead of scurrying away from my approach, they coordinated. Two moved to the sides, while a third grabbed my flashlight from the side pocket. They worked together, one pulling it out while the others kept watch, then passed it back through their ranks until it disappeared into the darkness. "What the actual fuck?" I whispered, frozen in place. The same thing was happening all around our camp. Raccoons were systematically going through our belongings, but they weren't tearing things apart like animals would. They were searching, selecting specific items. They took Mike's multi-tool, Ryan's batteries, Steve's compass, small things, important things, and the leader just stood there, watching, occasionally making those clicking sounds or nodding its head to direct the others. When a raccoon found something it deemed valuable, it would look to the leader for confirmation before taking it. For 15 terrifying minutes, we just stood there, too shocked to really intervene. When we did approach them, they would work together to distract us or block our path. Once, when Mike tried to grab his multi-tool back, 3 raccoons formed a line between him and the one carrying the tool, allowing it to escape with the prize. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, they began to retreat. The leader made a different sound, louder, more urgent, and within seconds, they all began backing into the forest, still facing us, still moving with that unnatural coordination. The leader was the last to leave, and just before it disappeared into the darkness, it looked directly at me again, tilted its head slightly, and made a single clicking sound that somehow felt like a promise. "We'll be back." And then they were gone, leaving nothing but disturbed dirt and paw prints as evidence they were ever there. "What the hell just happened?" Ryan's voice was shaking. We spent the next hour frantically checking our gear, making a list of what was missing. Flashlights, batteries, a multi-tool, matches, Steve's first aid kit, my pocket knife, some rope, all small but critical survival items, nothing perishable, nothing without purpose. They hadn't touched our food or our clothes, just tools and resources. None of us slept that night. We kept the fire blazing and took turns keeping watch, but the raccoons didn't return. By morning, the guys were already trying to rationalize what we'd seen. Maybe they were trained by someone, Mike suggested as we packed up. Like some crazy mountain man teaching raccoons to steal from campers. Or they've just learned from experience, Steve said. Animals can be smart, adapt to human behavior. But I knew what I'd seen. The way that leader looked at me, the way it directed the others, that wasn't learned behavior or coincidence. That was intelligence, strategy, planning. We hiked out that morning, cutting our trip short by 2 days. The others joked about it on the way back, tension easing with distance and daylight. By the time we reached our cars, they'd reduced the experience to "that crazy night raccoon stole our shit," a weird story to tell at parties. But I haven't been camping since. I can't shake the memory of those yellow eyes, that deliberate smile, the way the leader seemed to recognize me specifically. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking I hear those clicking sounds outside my apartment window, 15 floors up in Manhattan. I've researched raccoon behavior extensively since then. Nothing I've found explains what we saw. Raccoons don't coordinate like that, don't strategize, don't target specific items while ignoring food. They don't smile at you like they know something you don't. I don't tell this story often because I know how it sounds, but I know what I saw in those woods, and I'm certain of one thing. Deep in the Adirondacks, there's a colony of raccoons that aren't just animals. They're watching, planning, collecting, and whatever they're preparing for, I don't want to be around when they're ready. Sometimes I catch myself looking at the raccoons in the city parks differently now, wondering if they're sending information back, if they're all connected somehow. It sounds insane, I know, but if you've seen what I've seen, you'd understand why I'll never go back to those woods again. Story 16. I still can't sleep properly since our trip to Blackwood Hills 3 weeks ago. Every noise in my apartment makes me jump, and I've been keeping all the lights on at night. I need to write this down somewhere because my friends and I have barely talked about it since it happened, like we're all trying to pretend it never happened, but I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway. 6 of us, me, Alex, Emma, Michael, Lisa, Jake, and Sarah, had been planning this trip for months. We found this cabin rental online that looked perfect, secluded, surrounded by pine trees with hiking trails nearby and no neighbors for miles. The photos showed a rustic place with a fire pit and wraparound porch. The isolation was the main selling point. We all needed a break from our phones, work, and the constant noise of the city. We arrived on Friday afternoon. The drive up was beautiful, winding mountain roads with the trees getting thicker as we climbed higher. The GPS signal cut out about 20 minutes before we reached the turnoff, but we had printed directions just in case. The cabin was exactly as advertised, maybe a bit more run down than the photos suggested, but it had character. 2 stories, with 3 bedrooms upstairs, a main living area, and a kitchen downstairs. From the moment we walked in, something felt off, not in any way I could explain right then. The cabin was clean enough, but the air inside felt stale, like no one had been there in ages, despite the owner claiming he'd prepared it for us just days before. The floorboards creaked with every step, which I expected in an old cabin, but some of the noises seemed to come from places where none of us were walking. "This place is amazing," Sarah said, dropping her bag in the living room. She's always the most enthusiastic of our group. Jake immediately claimed the largest bedroom upstairs for him and Emma, while Michael and Lisa took the one with the view of the forest. Sarah and I took the smallest room with twin beds. That first night we grilled burgers outside, drank beer around the fire pit, and told ghost stories, the typical cabin trip stuff. Around midnight, we all headed to bed. I remember waking up around 3 in the morning to what sounded like footsteps on the porch. I lay there frozen, straining to hear more, but it stopped. I convinced myself it was probably just an animal. Saturday morning, we made a huge breakfast and planned a hike through the surrounding woods. The hiking trail was marked on a faded map we found in a drawer. It was supposed to lead to a small waterfall about 3 miles from the cabin. The weather was perfect, sunny, but not too hot. We packed water bottles, some snacks, and started our hike around 11. The trail was overgrown in spots, like it hadn't been maintained in years. About 2 miles in, Jake started going off trail to explore. "Jake, would you stick to the path?" Emma called after him. "We don't want to get lost out here." "Come on, where's your sense of adventure?" he shouted back, pushing through some bushes. That's when he called us over. "Guys, check this out." We followed his voice about 30 feet off the trail. Jake was standing in a small clearing, kicking at a pile of leaves and dirt. At first, I didn't understand what he was looking at. Then I saw it. A metal handle sticking out from the ground, attached to what looked like a wooden trap door partially buried under years of forest debris. "What is that?" Sarah asked, stepping closer. "Only one way to find out," Jake said, already kneeling to clear away more leaves and dirt. Lisa hung back. "Maybe we shouldn't mess with it. It could be private property." "We're in the middle of nowhere," Michael said. "And technically we're renting this land for the weekend." I should have listened to Lisa, I wish we all had. But curiosity got the better of us. Jake cleared enough debris to reveal a wooden trapdoor about 3 feet square, secured with a rusted padlock. The wood looked weathered, but not rotted, like it had been maintained over the years. "It's locked," Emma pointed out. "Not for long," Jake replied, picking up a rock the size of a softball. He smashed it against the padlock 3 or 4 times until the mechanism broke. The sound of that lock breaking echoes in my mind every night. Jake pulled the trapdoor open, revealing a set of concrete stairs descending into darkness. A musty smell wafted up, but not the decay or mold you'd expect from an abandoned underground space. It smelled used. "I've got a flashlight on my phone," Michael said, switching it on and pointing it down the stairs. The beam revealed about 10 steps leading to what looked like a concrete floor. "Is it a bunker?" Sarah wondered. "Like a bomb shelter or something?" Let's find out, Jake said, already placing his foot on the first step. Emma grabbed his arm. Are you crazy? You don't know what's down there. It's just an old storm cellar or something, Jake insisted. Probably been here since before the cabin was built. I don't know why we followed him down. Maybe it was the group mentality, or maybe it was genuine curiosity. But one by one, we descended those stairs, our phone flashlights creating eerie shadows that danced across the walls. The cellar was bigger than I expected, maybe 15 by 20 feet, with a concrete floor and walls. The ceiling was low. Michael, who's 6'2", had to duck slightly. But it wasn't what I expected at all. This wasn't some forgotten cobweb-filled hole in the ground. It was clean, organized, recently used. Along one wall were metal shelves stocked with supplies, canned foods, bottled water, batteries, first aid kits, all neatly arranged. None of it was expired. Some of the water bottles still had price stickers from a local store. On another wall hung camping gear, sleeping bags, a portable stove, lanterns. What the hell? Emma whispered, running her finger along one of the shelves. There's no dust. Someone's been here recently. Lisa pointed to the far wall. Guys, we all turned our flashlights in that direction. The stone wall was covered in markings, dates carved into the rock, not random graffiti, but a methodical calendar. Days, months, years, all etched in sequence. The most disturbing part? The dates continued right up to the present, including the date we arrived at the cabin. Is this a joke? Sarah's voice shook. Did the cabin owner do this to freak us out? Michael stepped closer to examine the wall. These aren't all carved with the same tool or at the same time. Look at how the older dates have different depths and styles. Jake laughed nervously. Maybe it's just a weird local tradition. Hunters or hikers using this as a shelter and keeping track of when they're here. Then where are they now? I asked. And why is our arrival date on the wall? The silence that followed was deafening. Lisa was the first to head for the stairs. We need to get out of here, now. No one argued. We scrambled up the stairs, Jake pulling the trapdoor shut behind us. We practically ran back to the trail, constantly looking over our shoulders. No one spoke until we reached the cabin. Once inside, we locked all the doors and windows. The sun was still up, but the forest suddenly seemed much darker, the trees closing in around the cabin. We should call the police, Lisa suggested, pulling out her phone. No service. There's no landline either, Michael confirmed after checking. Jake paced the living room. Look, we're overreacting. It's probably just some eccentric local who uses that cellar as a bug-out spot. The dates might be some kind of record keeping. Then why is our arrival date there? Emma demanded. How would they even know we were coming? The rental booking, I suggested. If someone local has access to the reservation system, they'd know exactly when people were staying at the cabin. Sarah hugged herself. But why? Why track strangers coming to stay in a rental cabin? No one had an answer for that. We debated what to do for hours. Leave immediately, stay the night and leave in the morning, call the police once we had cell service. The discussion went in circles. Eventually, we decided to stay the night, partly because no one wanted to navigate those mountain roads in the dark, and partly because we tried to convince ourselves we were overreacting. We made dinner in tense silence, jumping at every creak and groan of the old cabin. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound from the forest seemed amplified. Around 2 a.m, I heard what sounded like footsteps on the porch again, followed by a gentle scraping at the front door, like someone testing if it was locked. I lay frozen in my bed, too terrified to move or wake Sarah in the other twin bed. The scraping stopped after what felt like hours. When I finally gathered the courage to look out the window, I saw nothing but darkness. But I swear I heard twigs snapping as something or someone moved away from the cabin and back into the trees. At first light, we were all up and packing. No one needed to discuss it. We were leaving. We cleaned up hastily, loaded our cars, and were on the road by 7:30. As we drove down the mountain, I kept checking the rearview mirror. The forest seemed to be watching us. About halfway down, at a point where the road curved alongside a steep drop, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Through a break in the trees, I could see a figure standing on a ridge, watching our cars. They were too far away to make out any features, just a dark silhouette against the morning sky. But they were definitely watching us, and they were holding something that caught the sunlight and flashed briefly. Maybe binoculars or a camera. I didn't point it out to the others. We were already scared enough, and I wasn't completely sure what I'd seen. But that image is burned into my memory. We never reported what we found. What would we say? We broke into a well-stocked underground cellar in the middle of nowhere and got spooked by some dates on a wall. It sounded ridiculous even to us who experienced it. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. 2 days after we got home, I received an email from the cabin rental company thanking us for our stay and hoping we'd come back soon. There was an attachment, a feedback form. When I opened it, I noticed something strange in the background of the company's logo at the top of the page. The logo showed the cabin with the forest behind it, but in this version, barely visible unless you were looking for it, was a small marking carved into one of the trees. A date, the day we left. I've tried to convince myself it's a coincidence or that I'm seeing things that aren't there. But deep down, I know someone was watching us the entire time. Someone who knew when we arrived and when we left. Someone who maintains that cellar for a purpose I can't, and maybe don't want to, understand. I still don't know what we stumbled upon in Blackwood Hills. But I'm certain of one thing. We were being watched, and whatever purpose that cellar serves, we weren't supposed to find it. Sometimes I catch myself checking the calendar, wondering if somewhere, on a stone wall in an underground room, someone is carving today's date and making preparations. For what? I don't want to know. Story 17. I've been holding this in for way too long and I need to get it off my chest. 3 years ago, my fiancé Marcus, our friend Kyle, and I moved into what seemed like an incredible deal. A 5-bedroom house in Maplewood that was way below market value. We were so excited. Marcus and I had been saving for our wedding, and finding a place this size that we could actually afford felt like winning the lottery. We should have known better. The house had this bizarre layout that the real estate agent called unique. It was split into 4 subfloors, like someone had started building one house, changed their mind halfway through, and just kept adding levels wherever they'd fit. Kyle immediately claimed the finished basement for himself, since it had its own bathroom and a separate entrance. Marcus and I took the master suite on the 3rd subfloor. The day we moved in was exhausting but normal. We ordered pizza, drank beer, and collapsed into bed surrounded by boxes. I remember feeling so happy that night, planning where everything would go, talking about paint colors. I had no idea what was coming. It started that very first night. I was unpacking our clothes while Marcus was hooking up the TV in the living room. I was alone in our bedroom when I heard it. A whisper right next to my ear, just the H sound, like someone was about to say hi, but stopped. I literally jumped and spun around, but there was nobody there. I told myself it was just the air conditioning or maybe the house settling. Old houses make weird noises, right? The next morning, I noticed our dogs acting strange. We have 2 labs, Baxter and Luna, who are normally super chill. They kept staring at the bathroom doorway and growling, especially at night. It was the shower window that really freaked me out. It was positioned weirdly high in the wall, frosted glass, but still visible from outside if someone was tall enough. Every time I showered, I felt like someone was watching. Marcus felt it too. He started taking quicker showers and always seemed on edge in there. About 2 weeks after moving in, Kyle left for a work trip. He travels a lot for his job, sometimes gone for weeks at a time. That first night alone without him, I had to do laundry in the basement. I'd been down there plenty of times with Kyle around and felt fine. But that night was different. The moment I stepped off the last stair, this overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. The air felt heavy, almost like it was pushing against me. I hurried to throw the clothes in the washer, trying to shake off the feeling that I wasn't alone. That's when it happened for the first time. The laundry room door closed behind me. Not slammed, just closed. Slowly. I hadn't felt any draft. I told myself it was the house settling or something, but when I tried to open it, the knob felt ice cold. I yanked it open and ran upstairs, leaving the laundry unfinished. I didn't tell Marcus right away. I didn't want to sound crazy, and honestly, I was trying to convince myself it was nothing. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every little noise made me jump. Around 3 in the morning, I experienced sleep paralysis for the first time in my life. I woke up completely unable to move, with this crushing weight on my chest. And I swear to God, I could see a dark figure standing in the corner of our bedroom. I tried to scream to wake Marcus, but nothing came out. When I finally could move again, the figure was gone, and Marcus was still sound asleep. I was still shaking when Marcus woke up for work. I finally told him about the door and the feeling in the basement. He tried to comfort me, said old houses make strange noises, but I could tell he was unsettled too. He promised to come home early that day. That night, though, something happened that made him a believer. He was working late in his office, which was in one of the spare bedrooms. I was already in bed when I heard him yell my name. He burst into our bedroom, white as a sheet, asking if I had been in his office. When I said no, he told me he'd seen someone walk in behind his chair. He'd caught the movement in his peripheral vision and turned, thinking it was me, but no one was there. Then his chair had been violently jerked backward, not just moved, yanked so hard he almost fell out of it. After that, we both started noticing more things. The dogs refused to go into certain rooms. They wouldn't enter or leave the backyard after dark without one of us physically going with them. We'd hear bumps in the night, tapping from inside the walls, footsteps in the attic when no one was up there. About a month in, Kyle started complaining about weird stuff happening in the basement. He'd wake up to find his belongings moved around. His TV would turn on by itself in the middle of the night. Once, he swore he woke up to find all his kitchen drawers and cabinets wide open, even though he'd closed them before going to bed. The longer we lived there, the worse it got. I started having nightmares every night, always the same one. I'd be trapped in the basement trying to get up the stairs, but they'd keep stretching longer and longer, and something was always behind me, breathing down my neck, but I couldn't turn around to see what it was. One night, around our second month there, I woke up at exactly 3:15 in the morning. I know because I checked my phone right away. Something had woken me, a sound like fingernails scratching along the wall behind our bed. As I laid there, frozen in fear, I heard a distinct whisper, "Get out." It wasn't in my ear this time. It sounded like it came from the corner of the room. I shook Marcus awake, but by the time he was conscious, the scratching had stopped. The activity seemed to intensify around that 3 a.m. hour. We'd hear footsteps above us when we were all accounted for. The dogs would suddenly start growling at empty corners. One morning, I found tiny handprints on the bathroom mirror, too small to be any of ours. When I tried to wipe them away, they reappeared the next day. 6 months in, Kyle started sleeping on our couch. He said he couldn't handle being alone in the basement anymore. He'd wake up feeling like someone was sitting on his chest, struggling to breathe. The final straw for him was when he woke up with 3 long scratches down his back, scratches that hadn't been there when he went to bed. We tried sage, we tried prayer. We even had a local paranormal investigation team come out, but they only picked up some unusual electromagnetic readings in the basement and master bathroom. They set up cameras but didn't catch anything conclusive. The weirdest part was how the house itself seemed to change. Doors that used to open easily would suddenly stick. Rooms felt smaller or larger depending on the day. The basement stairs, I counted them once, 15 steps. A week later, I counted again, 17. I know that sounds impossible, but I swear it happened. About a year into living there, Marcus and I were starting to have relationship problems. We'd snap at each other over nothing. Kyle became withdrawn and irritable. It was like the house was feeding off our negative energy, or maybe creating it. The incident that finally broke us happened during a thunderstorm in our second year there. The power went out around midnight. Marcus and I were in bed. Kyle was in the living room. All three dogs, Kyle had one too, started barking frantically at the basement door. Then, in the flash of lightning, I saw a child-sized shadow dart across our bedroom wall, but it wasn't cast by anything we could see. Marcus saw it too. We heard Kyle yell from downstairs, asking if we were moving around up there. When we called back that we weren't, he came running up, saying he'd seen someone walking on the ceiling of the living room, like literally walking upside down on the ceiling. We spent the rest of that night huddled together in the living room with all the lights we could find, flashlights, candles, our phone lights. None of us slept. When dawn finally came, we all agreed. We needed to move out. It took us another year to actually leave. Financial issues, lease complications, the difficulty of finding another place big enough for all of us. But the activity kept escalating. Objects would disappear and reappear in strange places. We'd hear children laughing when no children were present. Once, I found all the photos in our hallway turned upside down. The final straw was when Marcus woke up with handprints around his throat. Small ones, like a child's, but with too many fingers. They faded after a few hours, but that was it for us. We broke our lease, took the financial hit, and got out of there within 2 weeks. It's been a year since we left, and I still have nightmares about that place. Sometimes I'll wake up in our new apartment and swear I can hear that same whisper, just the H sound, right next to my ear. Marcus says he sometimes feels like he's being watched in the shower, even though our bathroom window here faces a brick wall. Kyle moved to another state entirely. Last time we spoke, he told me he still can't sleep with the lights off. The strangest part, when we were moving out, I tried to take some final photos of the empty house. Every single picture came out blurry, or with these strange light anomalies. Except one, a clear shot of the basement, with what looks like a small figure standing in the corner. I deleted it immediately. Some things you just don't want to look at too closely. I still drive by that house sometimes. There's a new family living there now. I've thought about warning them, but what would I even say? Sometimes I sit in my car across the street and watch their windows at night, wondering if they've heard the whispers yet, wondering if they've counted the stairs. Story 18. I've never told this whole story to anyone outside the department. Not because I wasn't allowed to, but because most people would think I'm crazy. Hell, I question my own sanity every day since it happened. But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I was working dispatch for Oregon State Police on September 18th, 1994. It was supposed to be just another boring overnight shift. I'd been doing it for 7 years by then. You get used to the routine: drunk drivers, occasional domestic disputes, and long stretches of silence broken only by routine check-ins from the troopers on patrol. Mark Hansen and David Wheeler were out that night. Good guys, both of them. Mark had been on the force for 12 years, David for 8. Mark was the serious one, by-the-book, meticulous reports, never a hair out of place. David was more laid back, always had a joke ready, but sharp as a tack when it mattered. They weren't usually paired together, but we were short-staffed that weekend. The night had been quiet, too quiet, honestly. I remember looking at the clock around 2 in the morning and thinking I might actually get through a shift without anything major happening. I was wrong. So goddamn wrong. At exactly 2:13 in the morning, Hansen's voice came through on the radio. Nothing unusual in his tone, just routine procedure. Dispatch, this is Unit 17. We're pulling over a black sedan, no visible plates, Highway 97 near mile marker 244, running dark. I acknowledged and logged it. Standard stuff. Black sedan with no plates was suspicious, but nothing that would make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Not yet, anyway. 3 minutes later. I'll never forget looking at the clock and seeing 2:16. Wheeler's voice suddenly burst through the radio. He wasn't calm like Hansen had been. He was shouting, his voice filled with a kind of panic I'd never heard from him before. Code 30, something's not right. Code 30 is officer needs immediate assistance. Every dispatcher knows that call makes your blood run cold. Then came the sound. I still hear it in my nightmares. This high-pitched screeching noise that literally made our equipment spark. I yanked my headset off as the sound pierced through the speakers. The monitoring equipment went haywire, needles slamming all the way to the right, lights flashing, and then nothing. Dead silence. I tried to raise them on the radio, again and again. Nothing. I immediately dispatched backup units to their location. The closest was about 10 minutes out. Those were the longest 10 minutes of my life. I kept trying to reach Hansen or Wheeler, but there was just dead air. When Trooper Jenkins radioed in from the scene, I knew something was very wrong. His voice was shaking. Dispatch, both patrol cars are here. Lights still flashing, doors open, engines running. No sign of Hansen or Wheeler. The black sedan is gone. He paused. I could hear him breathing heavily. There's no blood, no signs of struggle. Their weapons are missing from their holsters. It's like they just vanished. I dispatched more units and notified the sergeant on duty. Within 30 minutes, we had a full search operation underway. I stayed at my post well past the end of my shift, coordinating communications as the search expanded. What they found makes no sense to this day. Both officers' footprints were clearly visible in the dewy grass alongside the highway. They led about 20 feet from their vehicles, and then nothing. They didn't fade out gradually. They didn't veer off in different directions. They just stopped, as if Hansen and Wheeler had been plucked straight up into the air. When daylight came, things got even stranger. The investigators found this perfect circle of dead vegetation around the area where the footprints ended. Not just brown, but completely desiccated, like all moisture had been instantly sucked out. The circle was exactly 50 feet in diameter. They measured it multiple times because they couldn't believe how perfect it was. I wasn't there for this part, but I saw the photos. The soil in that circle was wrong. The guys from the lab said it showed radiation readings they couldn't identify, not like nuclear radiation, something else entirely, something that made their equipment give conflicting results. The worst part was the patrol cars. Both dashboard cameras had stopped recording at exactly 2:15 a.m. The memory cards were intact, the batteries were full, but they just stopped, and the radio equipment in both vehicles melted, not burned from the outside, but melted from within, like something had superheated the internal components to temperatures over 3,000 degrees. Yet the plastic casings around them were barely warmed. The technicians said that was physically impossible. I helped coordinate the investigation for the next several days. We pulled satellite imagery, interviewed everyone who'd been on that stretch of highway. The satellite data showed something I still can't explain, a spiral cloud pattern directly above the location, appearing exactly at 2:15 and disappearing 3 minutes later. The meteorologist said it defied all known weather patterns. It wasn't a natural formation. 3 days after they disappeared, a local hunter found Hansen's service weapon embedded in a tree trunk about a mile from the scene. Not lying against it, not hidden behind it, embedded in it, like the tree had grown around it. The lab tests showed molecular alterations in the metal that aged it decades in just 3 days. The metallurgist quit after filing his report, just packed up and left the state. The investigation continued for months, but we found nothing concrete. No bodies, no evidence of who had been driving the black sedan, nothing. Their families were devastated. Hansen had 2 kids. Wheeler was engaged to be married that December. Then, 6 months to the day after they vanished, a package arrived at headquarters, plain brown paper, no return address. Inside was Wheeler's badge, confirmed by the serial number, and a cassette tape. I was there when they played it. The tape contained 47 minutes of what the audio technicians identified as deep space background radiation, the kind of stuff radio telescopes pick up, but interspersed throughout were distorted human voices repeating badge numbers. Not just Hansen's and Wheeler's, but badge numbers of officers who had gone missing across the country over the past 50 years. Some of them I recognized from old case files. The official investigation was closed a year later. Missing, presumed dead, was the final determination, but some of us kept digging unofficially. What choice did we have? These were our people. In 2003, I got a call from Jenkins, who'd been first on the scene that night. He'd left the force by then, but maintained contacts. Highway construction crews were repaving that section of Highway 97 and found something buried at exactly the spot where Hansen and Wheeler had disappeared. It was a metal box, like a time capsule. Inside was a single newspaper dated September 18, 2044, exactly 50 years after they disappeared. The paper was in pristine condition, not aged at all. The headline story described how Hansen and Wheeler had reappeared after 50 years, unaged, with no memory of where they had been. According to the article, both men died within hours from something called temporal displacement syndrome. The newspaper was confiscated by federal agents who showed up within hours of its discovery. They claimed it was a hoax, but I saw it with my own eyes before they took it. The paper stock, the printing technology, it wasn't like anything we have now, and the byline on the article was written by David Wheeler's unborn son, the child his fiancée was carrying when he disappeared. I retired from the force in 2008. I couldn't handle the night shift anymore, not after what I heard that night. That screeching sound still wakes me up sometimes, and I find myself checking the clock to make sure it's not 2:16 a.m. I've spent years researching similar cases. There are more than you'd think: officers disappearing from remote locations, strange physical evidence that defies explanation, equipment failures that break the laws of physics. It's always hushed up, always explained away, but the patterns are there if you know what to look for. Sometimes I drive out to mile marker 244 on the anniversary. I don't know what I expect to find. Maybe I'm just hoping for some closure, or maybe I'm waiting for 2044 to come around to see if that newspaper was telling the truth. The official files say Hansen and Wheeler abandoned their posts or were victims of foul play, but I know what I heard that night. Something took them. Something that could melt solid metal from the inside, create perfect circles of death, and bend time itself. And the most terrifying thought, whatever it was, it's still out there. Story 19. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but keeping it bottled up is driving me crazy. I'm not supposed to talk about it. The department made that crystal clear. But after all these years of nightmares and cold sweats, I need to get this off my chest. I was working dispatch for Detroit PD back in 2002, March 13th to be exact. That night changed everything for me. I can't prove what happened, but I know what I heard, and I know what they found. It was a Wednesday night shift, nothing special. Cold, typical Detroit March weather with some light rain. I'd been at the department for 8 years by then, so I knew most of the officers pretty well. Pete Thompson and James Parker were on patrol in car 437. Good guys, both of them. Pete had this dry sense of humor that made those overnight shifts bearable. James was quieter, more by the book, but solid. The kind of cop you'd want backing you up. They started their shift at 11 that night, standard patrol route through downtown. I remember joking with Pete when they checked in, something about him owing me coffee from the night before. He laughed it off, said he'd bring me the fancy stuff next time. That was the last normal conversation I had with either of them. Their first check-in was at 11:47. Everything normal. Pete's voice was calm, professional. 437 checking in. All quiet on the Western Front. Standard procedure, nothing unusual. Around 12:15, we got a call about a domestic disturbance on Warren Avenue. I dispatched it to 437 at 12:32. 437, we've got a domestic at 2284 Warren, female caller, sounds distressed. No response. I tried again. 437, do you copy? Domestic disturbance, Warren Avenue. Still nothing. That wasn't like them. Pete and James were meticulous about radio protocol. They never missed a call. I checked the system. Their GPS was active, showing them about 6 blocks from Warren. Close enough that they should have responded immediately. 437, please respond. That's when I heard it. not a voice exactly. More like, I don't know how to describe it. A sound that wasn't a sound, like static, but structured somehow. 3 distinct bursts, then silence. I figured it was interference. I tried one more time. 437, radio check. Then I heard Pete's voice, but something was wrong. His words came through clear, but his tone was off flat, like someone doing a poor imitation of Pete. 437 responding, all it is. Well, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. In 8 years, I'd never heard Pete talk like that, and he'd never used that phrase, all is well. It wasn't police terminology. It sounded like something from a bad movie. 437, confirm your location. More of that strange static, then silence. I notified my supervisor, Sarah. She tried reaching them too, got nothing. By 1 a.m., we had 3 units searching for car 437. The GPS tracker showed them in an industrial area near the old Packard plant, nowhere near their assigned patrol route. What happened next still gives me nightmares. At 1:17 a.m., the radio crackled. It was James's voice, but he was whispering, barely audible. Don't send anyone. They're waiting. They know. They've always known. Sarah grabbed the mic. Officer Parker, what's your situation? Do you need assistance? A long pause, then that strange static again. 3 bursts, just like before. James's voice returned, but it wasn't whispering anymore. It was monotone, like Pete's had been. No assistance required. Investigating anomalous readings. Will return to patrol shortly. Sarah looked at me, and I knew she felt it too. Something was very wrong. What anomalous readings? 437, please clarify. More static, longer this time. Then a sound that still haunts me. A high-pitched tone that made my ears ring, followed by what sounded like multiple voices speaking in unison, but the words were scrambled somehow, like hearing a foreign language underwater. The only clear words came at the end. They found us. We lost contact completely after that. The GPS signal from car 437 froze, showing them stationary at the industrial lot. By 2 a.m., the search had expanded to include K9 units and a helicopter. Everyone was on edge. Pete and James weren't rookies who might wander off. They were veterans, guys who knew the protocol. At 3:15 a.m., a search unit found their squad car. The sergeant who radioed it in sounded shaken. Car 437 located at the old Fisher Body plant lot. Engine running, headlights on, both doors open. No sign of Thompson or Parker. I was scheduled to end my shift at 6 a.m., but I stayed. I couldn't leave, not with Pete and James missing. By morning, the entire department was in chaos. The scene made no sense. Their service weapons, badges, and utility belts were arranged neatly on the hood of the car, like someone was displaying them. Their wallets, phones, everything personal was still inside the vehicle. The dashboard camera had been disabled, not damaged, but carefully disconnected. The recording tape was missing. Blood drops led away from the car, but stopped abruptly after about 30 feet, like whoever was bleeding just vanished. What really got to me was the mileage. Their car showed only 18 miles traveled, but the GPS tracking log showed at least 50 miles. It's like they went somewhere that didn't register, or someone messed with the odometer. I was there when they found Pete's notebook. He always kept it in his left breast pocket. The last entry, written in handwriting that didn't quite look like Pete's, said, "They found us." The exact words we'd heard over the radio. I wasn't supposed to see the forensic report, but Sarah showed it to me a week later. James's blood was identified at the scene, but there was something else, some substance the lab couldn't identify. The report called it organic material of unknown origin with molecular structures inconsistent with known terrestrial biology. What the hell does that even mean? 2 months after they disappeared, I was going through old reports and found something nobody had connected. 3 weeks before they vanished, both Pete and James had separately reported strange incidents. Pete claimed an unmarked black sedan had followed him home 4 nights in a row. James reported seeing someone watching his house from the vacant lot across the street. Both reports were dismissed as paranoia or stress-related. Nobody took them seriously. Then came the package. 3 months after they disappeared, a small box arrived at the station addressed to Detroit Police Department, re Officers Thompson and Parker. No return address. Inside was Pete's service revolver, completely disassembled. Every piece was clean, arranged perfectly like a display, and a typed note: some doors should remain closed. The official investigation hit dead end after dead end. Security footage from that night showed car 437 entering the industrial lot at 12:28 a.m. No other vehicles visible. Then it shows 2 figures approaching from the darkness, and both Pete and James calmly getting out of their car. No signs of struggle, no drawn weapons. They just walked toward these figures, then all 4 walked out of camera range. Neither Pete nor James ever came back to their car. The department eventually classified it as an unsolved disappearance. Theories ranged from drug cartel involvement to mental breakdowns to some elaborate scheme to fake their deaths. But none of those theories explain what I heard on that radio. A year later, I transferred to another department in Ohio. I couldn't stay in Detroit anymore. Every time I drove past that industrial area, my chest would tighten up. I'd hear that static in my head. 3 bursts, always 3. I've never told anyone the strangest part. 2 nights after they disappeared, I woke up at exactly 3:15 a.m., the same time their car was found. My radio scanner, which I always kept by my bed, turned itself on. Through the static, I heard Pete's voice, clear as day. "Mary, that's my name. Don't look for us. Some questions shouldn't be answered." Then that same strange static. 3 bursts. The next morning, I found my front door wide open, though I know I'd locked it. On my kitchen table was a police-issue flashlight. It was Pete's. I recognized the small dent on the side from when he'd dropped it months earlier. It was bone dry despite the heavy rain that had fallen all night. The battery was dead, but when I tried replacing it, the flashlight wouldn't work. I took it apart and found something wedged inside where the batteries go, a small piece of metal with markings that didn't look like any language I'd ever seen. I still have that piece of metal. Sometimes at night, it seems to glow faintly in the dark, and on certain nights, especially in March, my radio will turn on by itself. Static. 3 bursts. Pete and James have been missing for 21 years now. The case is cold, forgotten by almost everyone. But I remember, and I've spent 21 years trying to convince myself that what I heard that night was just noise interference. But I know better. And sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, I catch myself checking my rearview mirror, looking for headlights that seem to follow just a little too long, or faces in the darkness that don't quite look right. Whatever happened to Pete and James that night, I'm convinced of one thing. They found something they weren't supposed to find, or something found them, and that something is still out there. I just hope it doesn't remember me. Story 20. I still can't shake what happened last year. I've tried therapy. I've tried medications. I've tried convincing myself it was all just some bizarre misunderstanding. But I know what I saw, and the local authorities' reaction haunts me almost as much as the cabin itself. Let me start from the beginning. I'd been working 70-hour weeks at my marketing firm in Seattle for about 3 years straight. My doctor kept warning me about my blood pressure, and I'd developed this eye twitch that wouldn't go away, classic burnout symptoms. So when my buddy Mark mentioned his uncle had a rental cabin in the Pinecrest Mountains, I jumped at the opportunity. The rental wasn't listed on any websites, just an old-school arrangement where you call the owner, mail a check, and get directions to the key hidden under a specific rock by the back door. Perfect. No digital footprint, no constant email notifications, no co-workers, just checking in on my vacation. The drive up there took about 4 hours from Seattle. The last 10 miles were on this narrow, winding road that felt like it was taking me further and further from civilization. The GPS lost signal about halfway through, but the hand-drawn map the owner had faxed me, yes, faxed, That's how off-grid this place was. Got me there without issues. The cabin itself was exactly what I needed. Rustic but comfortable. One bedroom, a decent kitchen, a living room with a stone fireplace, and a small porch overlooking nothing but trees and mountains. The owner had mentioned there was no cell service, and he wasn't kidding. My phone showed no service from the moment I arrived and stayed that way the entire time. The first 3 days were incredible. I slept until my body naturally woke up, usually around 9 or 10, which was unheard of for me. I'd make coffee, sit on the porch, read books I'd been meaning to get to for years. I took long walks on a clearly marked trail that looped around a small lake about a mile from the cabin. At night, I'd build a fire, cook simple meals, and fall asleep to the sound of absolutely nothing. No sirens, no neighbors, no notifications, just silence. On the 4th morning, I woke up feeling more refreshed than I had in years. After breakfast, I decided to explore a bit more. I'd noticed what looked like a faint path behind the cabin that headed in the opposite direction of the lake trail. It wasn't on the property map the owner had provided, but it was clearly a path, overgrown, but definitely there. I filled my water bottle, put on hiking boots, grabbed a granola bar, and decided to check it out. The path was narrow but followable, winding through dense pine forest. In some spots, it almost disappeared under fallen needles and moss, but I could always pick it up again after a few moments of searching. About 30 minutes in, the trees thinned slightly and I saw it. Another cabin. It was older than mine, more weathered, but definitely not abandoned. There were boot prints in the muddy areas around the cabin, fresh enough that the edges hadn't dried completely. A small wood pile was stacked neatly against one wall. The curtains in the windows were drawn, but not completely. I could see lights on inside. The most noticeable thing was the door. It was slightly ajar, maybe 3 or 4 inches open. I approached slowly, feeling a strange uneasiness creep up my spine. Something felt wrong, though I couldn't pinpoint what exactly. It was mid-morning on a beautiful day, but the scene in front of me had an unsettling stillness. "Hello?" I called out from about 20 feet away. "Anyone home?" Silence. I moved closer. "Sorry to bother you. I'm staying at the cabin down the path, just out exploring." Nothing. I reached the small wooden porch. The door remained slightly open, revealing a sliver of the interior. I knocked loudly on the door frame. "Hello? Everything okay in there?" When no one answered, I pushed the door open a bit more and peered inside. What I saw made my stomach drop. The cabin was clearly occupied, actively occupied, but completely empty of people. A half-eaten sandwich sat on a plate at the small dining table. Next to it, a mug with coffee, still dark, but with a thin film on top. Not freshly abandoned, but recently, hours, not days. What struck me immediately was the sense that whoever had been here had vanished mid-activity. 2 wallets lay open on the counter near the door, driver's licenses visible. One belonged to a man named Thomas Grayson, 43, from Portland. The other to Elizabeth Grayson, 41, same address. A gas receipt was tucked into Thomas's wallet, dated just 3 days earlier from a station in the nearest town. The cabin was a single room with a partitioned bathroom area. 2 suitcases sat at the foot of the queen-sized bed, looking packed but clearly being lived out of. A few items of clothing were folded neatly on top. A jacket was draped over one of the dining chairs. A paperback thriller lay face down on the arm of the small couch about halfway through. The kitchenette area had food preparation clearly interrupted. A loaf of bread with the bag open, a jar of peanut butter with the lid off, a knife with peanut butter still on it lying next to the second unfinished sandwich. I checked the bathroom. Clean towels hung neatly on a rack. Toothbrushes stood in a cup by the sink. Toiletry bags were arranged on a small shelf, unzipped with items visible. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no overturned furniture, no broken items. The cabin was pristine except for the very clear evidence that 2 people had simply stopped existing in the middle of making lunch. My heart was pounding now. I stepped back outside and shouted as loud as I could, "Hello? Anyone out here? Thomas? Elizabeth?" My voice echoed through the trees and faded into nothing. Birds chirped, the wind rustled leaves. Nothing else. I went back inside and looked more carefully. Their phones were there, both charging on the small bedside table. Keys to what I assumed was their car sat in a small dish near the door. I checked the closet. Jackets hung inside, along with a small safe that was closed but not locked. I opened it and found some cash, jewelry, and passports. Who leaves for any reason without their wallet, keys, phone, and passport? I couldn't shake the feeling that if I opened the refrigerator, I'd find milk that was still good. That's how recent this felt. These people hadn't been gone long. I stepped outside again and circled the cabin. There was no vehicle anywhere to be seen. The nearest road was where I'd parked my car, a 30-minute hike away. Where had they gone, and how? Something caught my eye behind the cabin, a second path, even fainter than the one I'd followed to get here. It headed deeper into the forest, up toward the mountains. I followed it for about 100 yards, calling out periodically, but it quickly became so overgrown that I lost it completely. I returned to the cabin one more time, taking photos of the IDs with my phone. I wasn't sure what to do, but I knew I needed to report this to someone. It was too bizarre, too unsettling to ignore. I hiked back to my cabin, got in my car, and drove the 40 minutes to Pinecrest, the small town at the base of the mountains. The sheriff's office was a small building on the main street, with just 2 deputies on duty when I arrived. I explained what I'd found to Deputy Larson, a weathered man in his 50s. As I described the scene, the half-eaten food, the personal belongings left behind, the complete absence of the cabin's occupants, his expression remained neutral, almost bored. When I finished, he sighed and said, "It happens sometimes." I stared at him. What happens sometimes? People come up here to get away. Sometimes they decide to keep going, leave everything behind. They left their wallets, I said, their phones, their passports. Who does that? He shrugged. Folks who want to disappear. But they were in the middle of making sandwiches, I insisted. The coffee was still in the mug. "I'll send someone to check it out," he said, taking minimal notes. "Can you mark the location on this map?" I did my best to show him where the cabin was located in relation to mine. He didn't seem particularly concerned or interested, which only increased my uneasiness. I spent the rest of my trip on edge. I didn't go back to that cabin, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I cut my vacation short by 2 days, the peaceful isolation suddenly feeling threatening rather than restorative. 3 weeks later, I called the sheriff's office to follow up. They claimed they'd checked the cabin I'd reported and found nothing unusual. According to them, the owners of the cabin, not the Graysons apparently, said their friends had been staying there but had moved on earlier than expected. What about their belongings, I asked. Their IDs, wallets, phones. "Sir, we didn't find anything like what you described," the deputy said. The cabin was clean and empty when our officers arrived. I mentioned the names from the IDs. They had no record of any Thomas or Elizabeth Grayson visiting the area. I've spent the past year trying to find information about the Graysons. Their address in Portland led to an apartment building where no one by that name had ever lived, according to the property manager. The DMV had no record of driver's licenses issued to anyone matching their names and birth dates. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing. But then I remember the half-eaten sandwich, the coffee with the film on top, the book placed face down, mid-chapter, the peanut butter knife with spread still on it, 2 lives paused in the middle of an ordinary moment, with no explanation for how or why the people living those lives had simply ceased to exist. I haven't been back to Pinecrest Mountains. I won't go back, but I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, wondering what happened in those woods. And I still remember Deputy Larson's casual, chilling response. It happens, sometimes. Story 21, RPT. I've never told this story online before. Actually, I've barely told anyone. I still get cold sweats thinking about it, but I need to put this somewhere because I don't know how much longer I have. This happened about a year ago when I was working security at St. Margaret's Hospital in San Antonio. I was 21, fresh out of the academy, and thought I was hot shit because I'd just gotten promoted to level 3 security. That meant I could carry a weapon and handcuffs. Basically felt like I was playing cop without the actual responsibility. My supervisor was this guy named Agent Yates. Dude was in his 50s, ex-Secret Service, always wore these pressed black suits even in the Texas heat. He never smiled, never joked around, but he was fair. I respected him more than anyone I'd ever worked with. The hospital I got assigned to was this massive complex that had been built in sections over decades. The oldest wing dated back to the 1940s and had been abandoned for years. Budget cuts meant they just sealed it off instead of renovating or demolishing it. It was this weird situation where a modern hospital was literally attached to this decaying structure that nobody used. I'd been on the job about 3 months when Yates called me to his office one Friday afternoon. It was almost the end of my shift, and I was looking forward to grabbing beers with my buddies. When I walked in, there were 2 other guys I'd never seen before, James and Derek. Both ex-Marines, both built like brick walls. They worked security on the other side of the hospital, so our paths hadn't crossed. "Thompson," Yates said, not looking up from his paperwork, "we're doing a sweep of the old wing tonight. Need to make sure we don't have squatters or addicts setting up shop in there." I tried to hide my disappointment about missing my Friday plans, but honestly, I was also kind of excited. Everyone talked about the old wing in whispers. Nurses would tell stories about hearing voices, seeing shadows, the usual bullshit people come up with when they're bored. "Why tonight?" I asked. "Administration wants a full report by Monday," Yates said. "They're considering renovation options." James and Derek just nodded like this was completely normal. I got the impression they'd done this before. We geared up around 11 that night. Flashlights, radios, sidearms. Yates had a master key that would open any door in the hospital, even the old wing. We entered through a service corridor that connected the 2 buildings. The door was heavy metal with peeling yellow paint that read, "Authorized personnel only." The moment Yates unlocked it, I felt this rush of cold, stale air hit my face. It smelled musty, like old books and dust. The corridor beyond was pitch black. Our flashlight beams cut through the darkness, revealing scuffed linoleum floors and walls with peeling paint. "Stay close," Yates said. "Building's structurally sound, but there might be hazards. Watch your step." We moved through the corridor slowly. Our footsteps echoed in the emptiness. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but something about the place made me uneasy from the start. It wasn't just that it was abandoned. It felt wrong somehow, like walking into someone's house when you know they're home, but they're not answering the door. The first hour was uneventful. We checked patient rooms, supply closets, nurse stations. Everything was covered in dust, but there were no signs of anyone having been there in years. No graffiti, no drug paraphernalia, no sleeping bags, just emptiness and decay. Then we reached the old ICU. The ICU was designed differently from the rest of the building. It had 3 parallel hallways connected by miniature halls forming a grid pattern. Yates suggested we split up to cover more ground, him and me down the center, James on the right hallway, Derek on the left. That's when things went to shit. We'd barely separated when Derek called out. Not in a panicked way, just a "hey guys, check this out" kind of call. We all turned to look at him, standing about 20 feet away in the left hallway. Derek was completely still, staring at a doorway. Not moving, not speaking, just staring. "What is it?" James called. Derek didn't respond. He just kept staring. We walked over to him, and as we got closer, I noticed his face had gone completely white. His mouth was slightly open like he wanted to scream but couldn't. "Derek?" Yates put his hand on Derek's shoulder. "What are you looking at?" When we all turned to follow Derek's gaze toward the doorway, I immediately felt sick to my stomach. The smell hit me first. This putrid stench of rotting meat and something else I couldn't place. It was so strong I gagged, and then I saw it. Peering from the top of the doorway was, I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't human, it was humanoid, but wrong in every possible way. Its skin was this grayish-white color, stretched too tight over what looked like a skull, but the proportions were all wrong. The head was too large, too elongated. But the worst part, the part that still wakes me up at night, were its eyes, or rather where its eyes should have been. Instead, there were just these inky black voids, like someone had punched holes into reality. It was looking right at us. I know it was. I could feel it. For what felt like eternity, but was probably only seconds, nobody moved. Then the thing's mouth opened. It didn't have teeth. It was just this black, empty maw. No sound came out, but I swear I could hear screaming in my head. Yates was the first to react. "Go!" he shouted, pushing me back toward the corridor we'd come through. We ran, all of us. I've never run so fast in my life. Behind us, I heard something moving, not footsteps. It was more like a rushing sound, like wind or water. I made the mistake of looking back and saw it. The thing wasn't running, it was floating, gliding toward us, its body elongated and twisted in ways that defied anatomy. The next part is fuzzy. I think I blacked out from fear or hit my head or something. I just remember being outside in the parking lot gasping for air. Yates was on his radio speaking quickly to someone. James was throwing up in the bushes. Derek was just sitting on the ground, staring at nothing. None of us talked about what we saw. Not then. We filed our report saying the wing was clear, no signs of intruders. Yates added a recommendation for demolition due to structural concerns. That was it. We all went home. I didn't sleep for 3 days after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those black voids staring at me. About 2 months later, the hospital finally demolished the old wing. I thought maybe that would be the end of it, that whatever we saw would be buried under tons of concrete and steel. I was wrong. 3 weeks after the demolition, Yates killed himself, shot himself in his car outside his apartment. No note, nothing, just ended it. 4 days after that, James died too. Official cause was a heart attack, but he was 32 and in perfect health. How does a guy like that just have a heart attack? That left just me and Derek. We started meeting up, talking about what happened. Derek said he'd been seeing things since that night. Glimpses of that thing in mirrors, in windows, in the corner of his eye. I'd been seeing it too, but I was too scared to admit it until then. "It's following us," Derek said one night after we'd had a few too many beers. "It's going to get us all one by one, Yates, James, and now it's coming for us." I told him he was being paranoid, but I knew he was right. I could feel it watching me. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and see a darker shadow among the shadows in my room. Sometimes I'd be driving and see it in my rearview mirror, just for a split second. I went to a priest. I'm not even religious, but I was desperate. I told him everything. He performed some kind of blessing or exorcism or whatever on me. For a while, it seemed to work. The shadows stopped. I could sleep again. Then, last week, Derek disappeared. His apartment was empty, no signs of struggle, nothing missing except him. The police aren't taking it seriously. Adults have the right to disappear, they said, but I know what happened. It got him, and now it's coming for me. Last night, I woke up to that smell again, that rotting meat smell that makes you gag. My room was freezing cold, and I could see my breath misting in the air. And there, at the foot of my bed, was a darker shadow than the rest. I turned on every light in my apartment and stayed awake until dawn. I've called in sick to work. I'm writing this now because I need someone to know what happened, what's still happening. I don't know what that thing in the ICU was. I don't know why it targeted us or what it wants. All I know is that it's real and it's patient and it doesn't stop. If you've ever been in an abandoned hospital and felt like something was watching you, it probably was. And if you ever smell rotting meat when there shouldn't be any, run. Don't look back, just run. I think it's in my apartment now. The lights keep flickering and it's getting colder. I keep seeing movement in my peripheral vision. That smell is getting stronger. I'm going to try to leave, to go somewhere public where maybe it can't reach me, but I don't think it matters where I go anymore. If anyone reads this and believes me, pray for me. Or better yet, pray that this thing stays with me and doesn't find you next. I swear every word of this is true. I wish it wasn't. Story 22. I still can't shake what happened that weekend at Ginny Springs. It's been almost 10 years now, but every time I hear a cracking sound in the woods, my heart stops for a second. I've been meaning to write this down for a while just to get it out of my system, but I always find an excuse not to revisit it. Tonight, though, with the rain hitting my window and keeping me awake, I figure it's time. My name's Marcus. Back then, I was 26, working a desk job I hated and living for the weekends. Me and 5 friends from high school, Chris, Danny, Miguel, Taylor, and Jordan, had this tradition of doing a spring camping trip together. We'd been doing it since college, and it was the one thing I looked forward to all winter. That year, we picked Ginny Springs in Florida. It seemed perfect, about 3 hours from where we all lived, far enough to feel like we were getting away, but close enough that we wouldn't spend the whole weekend driving. I'd heard good things about the crystal clear blue water and the hiking trails. The website showed these amazing photos of people floating in the springs surrounded by tall trees, and I remember thinking it looked like paradise. We got there on a Friday afternoon in early April. The weather was perfect, warm enough to swim, but not that brutal Florida summer heat yet. The campground wasn't packed, but there were definitely other groups scattered around. We found a spot near the tree line that had enough space for our 4 tents and a decent fire pit in the middle. Chris and I shared one tent, Danny and Taylor took another, and Miguel and Jordan each had their own. We set up camp, cracked open some beers, and just enjoyed being away from everything. That first night was exactly what we needed. We grilled sausages and corn on the portable grill, drank too much beer, and spent hours talking about stupid things we did in high school. I remember laughing until my stomach hurt when Jordan retold the story of Miguel getting caught trying to sneak into the senior prom when we were sophomores. We finally crashed around midnight, all of us feeling good about having 2 more days ahead of us. Saturday started slow. I woke up around 9, made coffee on our little camp stove, and just sat watching the campground come to life. The others gradually got up and we made a big breakfast of eggs and bacon. The plan for the day was basically nothing, which was the whole point. Danny, Taylor, Chris, and Miguel wanted to go tubing in the springs, but I was content with setting up my hammock between 2 pines near our site and alternating between reading and napping. The day passed exactly as it should on a camping trip. I wandered down to the springs a couple times when it got too warm, cooling off in that impossibly clear water. I watched families with kids splashing around, couples on dates, and other groups like ours just enjoying being outdoors. The springs were busier than our campsite area, but still not crowded enough to feel annoying. When everyone got back from tubing around 4, we started prepping dinner. Jordan had brought a Dutch oven and made this amazing chili that simmered for hours. We built up the campfire as the sun started to set, and the night pretty much mirrored the one before. Food, drinks, stories, but with more planning for future trips and catching up on each other's lives. Around 11, we noticed dark clouds rolling in, and the weather app showed a chance of storms overnight. Nothing serious, just some rain and wind. We made sure everything was secured, doused the fire properly, and retreated to our tents around midnight. I remember feeling that perfect kind of tired that only comes from spending a day outdoors. My skin slightly sun-kissed, muscles pleasantly fatigued, and mind quiet for once. I fell asleep almost instantly to the distant sound of other campers' voices and the rustle of wind picking up through the trees. The sound that woke me is something I'll never forget. It wasn't like anything I'd heard before. A deep, almost primordial cracking followed by a massive rushing noise and then an impact that literally shook the ground. It felt like it lasted forever, but it was probably just seconds. My eyes flew open in total darkness, and for a moment I was completely disoriented. The first thing I registered was the time on my phone, 3:17 in the morning. The second was the absolute silence that followed the crash. No voices, no wind, nothing. Just complete stillness that felt wrong somehow. I lay there frozen in my sleeping bag, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Chris was still asleep beside me, somehow having slept through whatever the hell that was. After maybe 2 minutes of that eerie silence, I started hearing voices, not panicked screaming but urgent hushed talking. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness outside our tent. I nudged Chris awake. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "Hear what?" he mumbled, still half asleep. "That crash. Something fell, something big." By now the voices outside were growing louder and I could hear footsteps moving past our tent. I unzipped the tent flap and stuck my head out. The rain had held off, but the air felt heavy with moisture. About 15 feet away, a group of people were walking purposefully toward the far side of the campground, flashlights bobbing in the darkness. "I'm going to check it out," I told Chris, pulling on my shoes. Outside, I grabbed my headlamp from the camp table and clicked it on. Our other friends were emerging from their tents too, looking confused and sleepy. "What's going on?" Danny asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Not sure. Something made a huge noise. People are headed that way." We followed the growing stream of campers moving through the trees. Nobody was running, but there was a tension in the air, a collective sense that something was wrong. The path curved around a dense stand of trees, and as we rounded the bend, I saw where everyone was gathering. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. A massive live oak tree, one of those ancient ones with sprawling limbs that had probably been standing for centuries, had completely collapsed. Not just a branch, the entire tree had fallen, roots partially torn from the earth, creating a wall of dirt and tangled root system at one end. But that wasn't what made my stomach drop. The tree had fallen directly onto a tent, a small blue two-person tent that was now completely flattened beneath the enormous trunk. The reality of what we were looking at hit me in waves. That sound I'd heard wasn't just a tree falling. It was a tree crushing someone's tent, someone's sleeping space, someone. People were standing in a loose circle around the scene, most still in their pajamas or hastily thrown on clothes. Nobody was screaming or crying, just stunned silence punctuated by urgent whispers. A man in his 50s was talking into a phone, giving details about our location to what I assumed was emergency services. I moved closer, drawn by a horrible curiosity I couldn't control. That's when I saw it, something protruding from beneath the massive trunk where it had crushed the center of the tent. A foot, a bare human foot, pale and motionless in the beam of someone's flashlight. My legs went weak, and I had to step back, turning away and taking deep breaths to keep from throwing up. "Jesus Christ," Miguel whispered beside me. I hadn't realized he'd followed me forward. Within 15 minutes, park rangers arrived with emergency lights flashing. They quickly established a perimeter and asked everyone to return to their campsites. But we all knew what we'd seen. There was no urgency in their movements, no frantic efforts to lift the tree. They weren't trying to save anyone. They were recovering a body. We walked back to our campsite in silence. None of us could even form words about what we'd just witnessed. Sleep was out of the question. We sat around our cold fire pit, occasionally making eye contact, but mostly just staring into the darkness. Around 5 in the morning, we heard the distant thump of helicopter blades as a medevac chopper landed in a clearing not far from the campsite. When dawn finally broke, casting long shadows through the trees, we started packing up without discussion. None of us wanted breakfast. None of us wanted to spend another night there. The rangers had asked everyone to stay until they could take statements, but by 9, they'd spoken to everyone who had anything useful to say. We weren't among them. We'd only seen the aftermath. As we loaded our cars, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The tree that had fallen looked completely healthy from the outside. Thick bark, new spring leaves sprouting on the branches that now lay across the ground. It wasn't a dead tree that had come down in a storm. The sky had threatened rain, but it never materialized, and the wind hadn't been particularly strong. The drive home was mostly silent. Taylor broke it once to say, "That could have been any of us." She was right. Our tents were set up under trees too. Trees that looked just as sturdy and safe as the one that had fallen. We'd never even considered it a risk. When you go camping, you worry about bears, or weird strangers, or maybe flash floods. Not a tree that stood for hundreds of years suddenly falling in the night. I read the news reports later that week. The victim was a 32-year-old man camping alone. They didn't release his name in the articles I saw, just that the death was ruled an accidental tragedy. An arborist was quoted saying the tree had been rotting from the inside while appearing healthy on the outside, a widowmaker that gave no external signs of its imminent collapse. It's been years, but that weekend changed how I approach the outdoors. I still go camping, but I inspect every tree around my site now, looking for signs that probably wouldn't even tell me anything useful. I lie awake sometimes, listening to the sounds of the forest and wondering if one of them will be the last thing I ever hear. The randomness of it haunts me most. That guy didn't do anything wrong. He didn't camp in a restricted area or during severe weather. He just picked a spot that looked safe, like we all do, and went to sleep expecting to wake up to another day. Instead, a tree that had stood through countless storms and seasons chose that particular night to give up its fight with gravity. I've never been back to Ginny Springs. I don't think any of us have. Not because we think it's an especially dangerous place. This could have happened anywhere, but because none of us can hear the name without remembering that foot sticking out from under the tree trunk and the sound of helicopter blades coming to take away what remained of someone's life cut short by pure, senseless chance.